If you've ever ridden a ski lift at sunset, you know the second the mountain stops feeling like a resort and starts feeling like wilderness with a gift shop. The wind changes pitch, the shadows stretch across the runs, and the chairs keep moving, because they always do, until the one time they don't. Mine was the last operating day of the season, at a mid-sized resort in the Rockies. It was a bluebird afternoon, with spring snow, and most people were already drifting to the base for beers and selfies. I stayed up late because I wanted one more lap on the lift that served the upper bowl, the quiet part of the mountain where the trees are tight and the drop below the line is steep. A lefty waved me through at 422 like it was no big deal. I slid into the chair, pulled the bar down, and watched the loading ramp shrink away under my boot. The chair ahead carried a couple in matching helmets, laughing and tapping skis together like they owned the place. Halfway up, the sun slipped behind the ridge, and the temperature snapped. The cable started to sing that hollow steel hum you never notice when it's bright and noisy. I checked my phone. 4, 3, 4. No signal battery at 18%. Then the chairs slowed. Not the normal slowdown near the top station, but a long, uneven deceleration that made my stomach pitch forward. The lift shuddered once hard enough to rattle my teeth, and then stopped dead. My chair hung over a dark drainage, and the wind pushed it side to side, like it was testing the clamp. Lift stops happen. Someone drops a pole. A kid panics. Unloading a beginner falls. You sit, and you wait. But a minute became 2, and down at the base the lodge lights clicked on warm rectangles in the distance. Then the slope lights on the lower runs went dark, one by one, as if someone was shutting down a stage. The last headlamps drifted toward the parking lot, and I realized the mountain was closing without us. I yelled up the line. The wind swallowed my voice. I called the resort. No service. I tried 911. Nothing. My toes went from sting to numb, and the safety bar started to feel less like protection and more like a lock. Up the line near the next tower, I noticed a dark shape on the tower ladder. At first, I thought it was a bag, maybe something. A patroller forgot. Then it shifted just slightly, like a knee bending. A second later, I heard a faint clack, metal on metal, coming from that tower. Clack. Pause. Clack. Too deliberate to be wind. If it was an employee, where was the headlamp? Where was the radio chatter? And why was the resort going dark? The clacking sped up like someone descending, because they already knew exactly where we were hanging. The couple ahead stopped laughing. The woman kept turning around, eyes wide like she could force staff to appear by staring hard enough. She shouted something at me, and I caught the part that mattered. They forgot us. That word punched through my ribs. Resorts aren't supposed to forget people, but I've worked seasonal jobs. I know how closing days go, half the staff, gone radios quiet, everyone assuming someone else did the boring last check. My phone dropped to 1-2%, so I started recording, because doing something felt better than freezing. When I zoomed toward the tower, the video went grainy, but I could still make out the ladder, and something on it too narrow to be a bundled skier, and too steady to be a loose bag. Then from directly below the line, a voice rose out of the trees. Soft, close, almost friendly, like someone calling from the dark and pretending they're not in the dark. "Hey," it said. "You guys okay up there?" I scanned for a headlamp and saw nothing. The couple answered anyway, desperate, yelling that the lift was stopped and it was getting cold. The voice replied instantly, like it had been waiting for that confession. "Yeah, I know. They shut it down early. You're gonna be up there a while." I forced my voice out and asked who it was, if it worked for the resort, if it had a radio. It laughed once, small and humorless. "Don't waste your battery. It won't help. Out here, nobody hears you over the wind." Above us, the clacking stopped. Something shifted on the tower, and the cable gave a low groan, like weight had changed. My chair swayed harder. I looked at the chair behind me, empty. The next one, empty. But the chair directly behind the couple, the one I could clearly see all afternoon, was no longer empty. A figure sat in it, perfectly still, hands resting on the safety bar, as if it had been there the whole time. No headlamp, no reflective tape. Just a dark shape in the last smear of dusk face turned toward them. I didn't hear it arrive. The lift hadn't moved. There was no way for anyone to load that chair after shutdown. My brain tried to argue shadow jacket hypothermia. Then the figure tilted its head, slow and deliberate. and that motion had intention. The couple didn't turn around again. They knew the way animals know that looking makes something real. The voice under the line spoke again, closer now. If you keep yelling, they'll think you're messing around. End of season. People do stupid stuff. They'll finish their checks and go home. The tone was almost helpful. Best thing you can do is stay quiet and stay warm. The wind gets worse after the sun's gone. You don't want to lose feeling in your hands up there. My phone hit 9%. I flipped to camera, turned on the flash, and aimed it at the chair behind the couple. The burst of white light cut through the dusk for half a second. I saw enough to regret it. The figure wasn't wearing ski gear. It wore something like a dark coverall, and its face was pale and smooth. Not a mask exactly, more like skin pulled too tight, with eyes that didn't catch the light the way eyes should. The flash died. The figure didn't move. The woman made a sound that wasn't a word, just a raw animal noise that turned into sobbing. Then the lift started again, not smoothly but with a violent lurch, that snapped the cable into motion and swung us forward. The couple jerked in their seats and held the bar like it was the only thing tethering them to the world. The figure rode with us, still seated, still silent. From below the voice said one last thing almost gently. See? Told you. Just had to wait. We unloaded at the top into full darkness. No lifty. No patrol. The shack lights were off, and the bull wheel squealed like it was running itself. The couple bolted down the nearest cat track without even clipping their poles to their wrists. I stayed long enough to look back down the line. Every chair behind mine was empty again, swaying in the wind like nothing had ever sat there. At the base, the last manager was locking up. He checked a clipboard and went grey. The lift had been marked clear at 4, 2, 5, 7 minutes after I'd loaded. Patrol ran it back up with headlamps and radios and found no one, no tracks under the line except ours, where we'd been shouting down. But on the tower ladder, where I'd heard the clacking, the metal was scraped clean of rime in the shape of a handprint. 5 bare fingerprints pressed into frozen steel, too high for a kid, too neat to be an accident. The manager tried to explain it as a glove mark ice melt anything that sounded normal, but he couldn't make himself touch it. I still fee. I just don't trust the moment the mounting gets quiet, and I never let my phone battery drop below 20% on the lift again. The creepiest part about a ski resort isn't the empty mountain at night. It's the places that are supposed to feel safe, because they're full of people all day. Then suddenly they're not. Locker rooms are built for noise, boot buckles, snapping benches, scraping wet laughter, hair dryers, whining. When that sound disappears, the room feels wrong, like you've stepped onto a set after the crew went home. This happened to me during a weekend trip with friends, the kind of trip that's basically a tradition in my group. We rented a cheap room, shared lift tickets, and lived out of a pile of gear that smelled like cold plastic and old snow. On the second day, I skied hard, got sweaty, and ducked into the lodge late afternoon to change before we met for dinner. The women's locker room was mostly empty because it was past the rush and the day trippers were already gone. I picked a locker near the back, where there was space to spread out my stuff and not bump elbows with strangers. There was a long bench under a row of vents, and above that a drop ceiling with those flimsy white tiles that always looked like they could hide anything. I remember noticing one vent cover was slightly crooked, like it had been removed and put back in a hurry. I told myself it was nothing. It was a locker room after all. I peeled off my base layers, turned my back to the open room, and started pulling on a fresh shirt. That's when I felt that prickly sensation you get when someone is staring at you. Not a thought, not a fear. An instinct. I froze and listened. Somewhere above me, inside the ceiling, there was a soft scrape like fabric brushing metal. Then a tiny click, like a phone camera trying to focus. I snapped my head up at the vent. Nothing moved. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the fluorescent lights humming. I looked around to see if anyone had come in behind me. 2 sinks ran slow, unattended, and a row of lockers stood open like empty mouths. No one. I tried to laugh it off, but the feeling wouldn't go away. So I used reflection. The far wall had those cheap mirrors above the counter. I kept my head down like I was fixing my boots and watched the vent in the mirror. After a few seconds, the crooked vent cover shifted. Not a lot, just enough that the screw hole lined up differently. And in the dark gap behind the slats, something caught the light and glinted, round, glassy, like an eye or a lens. My stomach dropped so hard, I felt it in my throat. I yanked my jacket on over whatever I was wearing and grabbed my phone with shaking hands. I didn't call out. I didn't want whoever it was to know I knew. I hit record and held my phone up casually, like I was taking a selfie or checking my hair. When I angled the camera toward the vent, the screen showed a tiny pale circle behind the slats. It moved. Not like a vent vibrating, but like something adjusting to keep me in frame. I backed away toward the door, slow, pretending nothing was happening, and my boot heel knocked the bench. The sound echoed. Above me, the scraping stopped. For half a second there was silence, and then the vent cover snapped back into place with a sharp, metallic clack. I spun and ran out into the main lodge hallway, heart hammering so hard my vision tunneled. The first employee I saw was a teenage lifty in a hoodie near the rental counter. I told him someone was in the ceiling of the women's locker room. He blinked like I'd spoken another language, then grabbed his radio and called for security. While we waited, I kept looking back, half expecting someone to follow me out, half expecting nobody to come out, because nobody ever does in stories like this. A security guy showed up with a manager, both of them wearing that forced calm people use when they don't want to panic guests. They walked me back in. My knees felt watery. The locker room was still empty. The vent cover was still crooked. The manager grabbed a step stool, popped the cover off, and shined a flashlight into the gap. Dust floated in the beam like snow. Then he went very still. He told the security guy to come look. I couldn't see what they saw until the security guy reached in with 2 fingers and pulled something out by a strap. It was a phone. A cheap smartphone screen still lit. Camera app. Open recording. The security guy stopped the video, and for a second, the last frame froze on the screen. Me, half-dressed, looking up like a startled animal. I felt my face burn with a kind of helpless rage. The manager started swearing under his breath. They called the police. While we waited, the security guy looked deeper into the ceiling space and found a narrow service crawlway running above the lockers, just tall enough for someone to belly crawl from one vent to another. He kept talking into his radio, and I realized he was calling maintenance by name, not by department. When the police arrived, they asked if I could describe what I saw. I said I didn't see a face. I said I saw a lens. One officer climbed up with a flashlight, shifted ceiling tiles, and crawled into the space like he was entering a tomb. From below, we heard him curse, then another scrape faster. This time, a few seconds later, a hand punched up a tile 2 sections away, and a man dropped down behind the lockers, landing hard on the rubber mat. He wore a maintenance uniform and had fiberglass dust all over his hair and eyelashes. He raised both hands and started talking too fast, insisting he was checking airflow and that the phone wasn't his. The officers cuffed him anyway. The manager kept asking why he had a phone in the vent, why he was recording, why the crawlway even existed without locks. The man just stared at the floor and repeated that it wasn't his. That night my friends tried to make me feel better with jokes and drinks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the locker room wasn't the first place he'd done it, just the first place he got caught. The next morning, the resort called our room and apologized, offered refunds, offered to move us, offered everything, except the one thing I wanted, which was certainty. I asked if he worked there. They said, contractor. I asked how long he'd had access. They said they were still investigating. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unfamiliar email address. Subject line, you looked up. There was a single attachment. A still image from inside the ceiling space, looking straight down at me on the bench. The angle was wrong for the phone they pulled from the vent. It was higher farther back, like there had been another camera watching the whole thing. In the corner of the image reflected in the mirror, you could see the vent cover being pushed aside from inside by a hand that wasn't bare. It wore a black glove. I drove the rest of the way with my hands locked at 10 and 2, trying not to shake, because the worst part wasn't the picture. It was the simple message underneath it. We all have to work somewhere. I forwarded it to the detective. A week later, he told me the vent phone had been wiped clean, and the contractor badge number didn't match anyone on the resort's contractor list. The ceiling tiles were replaced within days, but nobody could tell me how a second camera got that angle. Ever since I change in a bathroom stall or my car, because I can't unlearn being framed. People think the scariest part of skiing is the speed or the cliffs. For me, it was the moment the resort got quiet and I realized I wasn't alone on a run that was supposed to be empty. It was late afternoon on a busy weekend, the kind of mountain with a cheerful village and a lodge that smells like fries and wet gloves. Around 3, 4, 5, the sun slipped behind the ridge and the temperature snapped, turning the snow blue and the shadows long. I was heading for one last lap on the far side, when I saw a bright orange rope across the entrance to a black diamond glade with a sign that said, "Close Ed," and a warning about hazards. Fresh tracks disappeared under the rope anyway, like somebody had already decided the sign didn't apply to them. I told myself I'd only go a little way, in just enough to cut back to an open trail. The moment I ducked under the rope, the sound changed. On the open run, you could still hear distant lifts and voices. Inside the trees, the mountain swallowed everything. My skis whispered over wind-packed powder, and my breathing sounded too loud. I followed the existing line until it split, then chose the smoother path. 2 turns later, I heard a faint scrape behind me, delayed by half a second, like someone else was making the same turn right after I did. I stopped. The sound stopped. I pushed off again. A few turns later, scrape, scrape. I stopped again. Silence. It felt like a game where the rule was I only got to hear it when I was moving. Somewhere uphill, there was a soft cough human enough to tighten my scalp, followed by the smallest crunch of snow. I didn't yell. Something in me refused to announce myself. I started skiing faster, taking the fall line instead of picking pretty turns. The glade narrowed, and the tracks I'd been following vanished into untouched snow. I popped out onto a narrow connector. Cut but orange closed markers continued along the edges like a warning fence. The connector curved and dipped into darker trees. I slowed, considering turning around, and that's when I saw movement behind me, close between 2 trunks, maybe 30 yards back. A shape stepped from shadow to shadow, too upright to be an animal. It wasn't moving like a skier, no gliding, no poles, no spray of snow. Just careful footsteps. I forced my voice into something casual. "Hey," I called. "This area's closed." The shape stopped. In the fading light, I caught the pale oval of a face, unhelmeted, watching me through branches. It didn't answer, and the silence felt intentional, like it wanted me to decide what to do next. I looked down at the snow between us and saw the detail that finished the argument in my head. A single boot print beside the connector, crisp and deep, with no second print next to it. The tread looked like a plain winter boot, not a ski boot, and the edge was so clean it had to be fresh. I had been the only one moving through that spot. Whatever was watching me had been close enough to step into my line without me hearing it arrive. I turned and pushed hard, skating along the connector until my lungs burned. Ahead I saw another rope line, where the connector met an open run dropping toward the base. Beyond it was scraped fast snow and the faint glow of village lights. I ducked the rope and shot onto the open run. The snow was firm and noisy now. My edges chattered as I carved. I looked over my shoulder. At the exact point where I'd popped out, the figure stood on the snow like it had been placed there. It didn't follow onto the open run. It just watched. I kept skiing, telling myself I was being ridiculous, that it was probably an employee making sure an idiot like me didn't get hurt. Then, halfway down, I heard it again scrape, scrape behind me on the hardpack. The run was empty. There should have been nobody. I glanced back, expecting a late skier. Instead, I saw a dark silhouette in the center of the run, coming down without poles, arms hanging at its sides, moving too smoothly for someone without balance aids. It wasn't carving. It was sliding straight, and every few seconds it made a tiny adjustment to stay lined up with me. I tried to pull my phone out, but my gloves fumbled and the screen was too dim to help. I didn't want to stop anyway. On hardpack, you can usually hear another skier coming, edges biting, a little hiss as they skid. Behind me there was only that steady scrape, perfectly timed, like a metronome. Every time I stole a glance back, the silhouette was in the same place, not gaining, not falling away, just matching me. That steadiness felt deliberate, like it was conserving energy, because it knew the mountain belonged to it more than it belonged to me. My chest tightened. I cut hard to the far right. The silhouette adjusted. I cut left. It adjusted. I pushed for the long run out to the lodge, the place where lights and people should have fixed everything, but the base was already half shut down. The lifts had stopped. The outdoor speakers were off. The only motion was a groomer, far away headlights, sweeping slowly like a lighthouse. I skied the run out, with my legs shaking, listening to the scrape behind me that never got louder, which was somehow worse, like it didn't need to hurry. When I finally coasted into the empty lift maze, I forced myself to look back. The run above me was perfectly empty. No silhouette, no movement, just my own tracks curving down the hill like proof I'd been there. I stood there, panting, the wind rattling chairs overhead. I pulled my phone out to call my friends, and in the reflective glass of a closed ticket booth, I saw someone standing behind me at the edge of the shadows, upright, still head slightly tilted. I spun around. Nothing. I snapped back to the glass. The reflection showed it again closer, as if it had moved while my eyes were off it. I ran into the lodge, straight to the brightest place I could find, and didn't stop until I was surrounded by strangers. Security and ski patrol humored me, woke me outside with flashlights, checked the base and the run out. No one was there. A patroller finally said, almost like a warning, that closures exist for reasons, and that some closures aren't for the day. On the big trail map by the door, the glade I ducked into was shaded differently than the rest of the resort, labeled as terrain removed from the boundary after an incident years ago. Later, when I tried to convince myself it was over, I opened the resort's app to check my vertical stats. It showed my pass had been scanned at an exit gate at 4:06 p.m., a gate I never went through. I took it to guest services the next morning. The woman behind the counter frowned, printed a log and told me the scan was real and that the gate camera had been down for maintenance. When I asked who had scanned it, she suggested I must have brushed too close to the sensor. Then she slid the paper back, like she didn't want to keep holding it. I left the counter with the printed log in my pocket, and the sick certainty that someone else had been carrying my day like a map. I stopped taking closed signs personally after that. I started taking them literally. Back in my room, I found a short video on my phone I didn't remember starting. The screen was black, like it had been recording from my pocket, but the audio was clear. You can hear my breathing, the rhythm of my skis, and then underneath it another breathing pattern, slow, steady, and close, as if someone had leaned in near my shoulder to listen. Right after that, a voice comes through so soft it could almost be wind, saying a single sentence, "You're off the map." Since then, if the shadows are long and the ropes are up, I turn around before the mountain decides for me. If you've never skied off-piste, it's hard to explain how quickly a resort stops feeling like a resort. 1 minute you're surrounded by groomed trails and people laughing in lift lines. The next minute you're in trees so thick the light turns green and every sound you make feels like it travels for miles. I learned that lesson the day my friend Evan convinced me to follow him, just a little beyond a boundary rope on the backside of the mountain. Evan talked like naming it, made it harmless, side country, stash, quick lap, and I followed because it was a powder day and because I didn't want to be the cautious one. By early afternoon, a thin cloud layer slid in and snow began falling in tiny dry grains that erased contrast. Every dip became a flat white trick. We ducked under the rope where other tracks already cut through, and the first 10 minutes were exactly what Evan promised. Quiet, soft, untouched snow, and trees spaced just far enough apart to weave through. Then the terrain rolled into a shallow bowl and the wind disappeared, taking sound with it. It felt like being inside insulation. Evan slowed and pointed left toward a dead snag that looked like a black hand reaching up through the snow. When I looked past his glove, I saw what made my stomach tighten prints. Not ski tracks, not snowboard tracks, not the scuffed boot marks you get when someone hikes. These were deep, clean impressions, as if something had stepped straight down into fresh powder and lifted out without smearing the edges. They came in a single line, one after another, like a biped walking. But the spacing was wrong, too long for a normal stride, too steady to be someone running, and too perfectly aligned to be a drunk person, stumbling. Each print was long and narrow with 5 distinct points at the front like toes, but the shape was stretched almost as if the foot had too much length and not enough width. I'd seen animal tracks before. This wasn't that. I called Evan over. He crouched, brushed the rim with his glove, and the edge held its shape, like it had been stamped. Snowshoes I offered, because my brain wanted an answer that didn't raise my pulse. Evan shook his hand. Snowshoes leave paired prints and you'd see the tail drag, he said, and pointed to the clean center of the impression. No pole tip marks. No ski edges. No shuffle. Just that single line crossing our route at a right angle, as if whatever made it didn't care we were there. Evan tried to make a joke about Bigfoot. It didn't land. The bowl was too quiet for joking to feel safe. We kept moving, telling ourselves the prints were old, telling ourselves drifting had distorted them, telling ourselves that a resort is not the wilderness, even when it looks like it. The snow kept falling, filming our goggles, until we were squinting. A few minutes later, Evan stopped again and lifted a hand for silence. That's when I heard it, a deliberate crunch that wasn't our skis, followed by a pause, then another crunch. It wasn't the random crackle of settling snow. It had rhythm. Evan called out, "Hey, you good," in the bright, forced voice people use when they're pretending not to be nervous. No answer. Another crunch closer, and then nothing. We dropped over a small roll into another bowl, and there they were again, prints cutting across the open snow like a line drawn with a ruler. Only now the details were clearer, and that made it worse. The toe points weren't rounded, like boots. They were separated like fingers. The heel was narrow, almost pinched. The print looked like a human foot, stretched into something it shouldn't be. I said, "Let's go back," and Evan looked uphill at our route. Our ski tracks were already softening under the new snow, the way your path disappears when you need it most. Evan checked his phone compass and frowned, like bad reception was the problem. Behind us came another crunch. Not downhill, not uphill. Behind. We spun and saw nothing. The bowl was empty. No jacket flash, no helmet, no poles. Just trunks and falling snow. But at the edge of the trees the surface looked disturbed. Snow compressed and then released like something had just stepped off and tried to hide that it had been there. Evan whispered my name like he didn't want the trees to hear. "Don't stop," he said. "Just keep moving." We angled uphill toward the left edge of the bowl, pushing through deeper snow that grabbed our skis. Every push felt like wading. That's when I noticed a new detail that made my throat go dry. Our own ski line was being crossed. Every 20 or 30 feet, a single set of those prints cut across behind us, always from right to left, always at roughly the same distance back, like a pacing animal matching our speed. Except the gait was even too measured, like something choosing its distance on purpose. Evan stopped and pointed into the open bowl. There was a wide arc of prints, a half-moon curving around the line we'd just taken. It wasn't following directly. It was circling. The pattern didn't look like wandering. It looked like containment, like whatever made them was walking a perimeter while we were looking the other way. In that moment my fear stopped being a spike and became a plan. Get back to something obvious, something straight, something man-made. Evan remembered a snowcat route that ran near this side of the mountain. We traversed hard branches, slapping our helmets, my legs burning, my hands numb inside my gloves. The crunching kept pace, sometimes disappearing behind the windless hush, then returning closer whenever we slowed. Then we saw boundary tape through the trees' orange strips sagging under snow, and it felt like seeing a shoreline after you've swallowed water. We slid under the tape and stopped on the resort side, panting. The world immediately had more sound, distant lift machinery, the faint murmur of the bass carried by wind, the normal noises you don't notice until they're gone. Evan let out a sharp laugh, the kind people make when they've been scared and don't want to admit it. I didn't laugh. I was staring at the snow just beyond the tape, because right there at the boundary line, where our skis crossed back into the resort, the strange prints ended. Not tapered off, not turned. ended like whatever made them had walked to the line and then stopped existing. There were no prints leading away on either side, no drag mark, no sign of it retreating into trees. Just the last impression, crisp in the fresh snow, and then nothing. We skied the marked trail back to the lift without looking into the woods. At the bottom, we went to guest services and tried to explain what we'd seen without sounding like we were telling a campfire story. The woman listened with the polite face people use when they've heard too many exaggerations and asked if we'd gone out of bounds. Evan lied automatically and said no. She said wildlife can make strange tracks, that wind can distort shapes, that people hike in odd gear. I almost accepted it, until she added casually that the resort had a standing rule. If you cross the boundary rope, you call it in, because visibility drops fast on that side, and people disappear back there. That night, I kept seeing the last print at the rope line, crisp in new snow, as if the mountain had set a marker and wanted us to remember exactly where we'd been allowed back in. The next morning, the boundary rope was freshly restrung, and the snowcat had groomed right up to it. But the line of prints was gone, erased so cleanly it felt deliberate. I didn't realize how easy it is to get lost on a mountain until the moment you stop recognizing the names on the trail signs. It was one of those afternoons when the weather can't commit thin grey clouds, a little spindrift visibility that keeps breathing in and out. I'd taken a wrong fork off a blue run after following a group I assumed knew where they were going, and within 10 minutes the resort's tidy world of groomers and orange markers felt far away. The trees got tighter, the terrain rolled in unfamiliar ways, and every shortcut dumped me into another unnamed corridor of snow and branches. I tried to backtrack, but my tracks were already softening under new flakes, and the wind kept blowing slashes of snow across them like a hand erasing a line. I told myself not to panic. I had a phone. I had a map. But the phone had one bar that kept disappearing, and the map was a cartoon that didn't match what I was seeing. That's when I saw him below me on a flat bench of terrain, standing as if he'd been waiting for my exact mistake. He was dressed like search and rescue, or close enough that my body relaxed before my brain caught up. Bright jacket with reflective striping, a helmet with a headlamp, a pack with straps and gear hanging off it, even a radio clipped to his. Cussed. He raised a hand and called up in that calm, confident voice you expect from people who do dangerous work for a living. "Hey, you all right up there?" Relief hit me so fast it felt like weakness. I yelled back that I'd lost the trail and asked if he could point me to the nearest run. "Yeah," he said immediately. "You're off the main boundary. Happens all the time. Come down slow and I'll get you back." I skied toward him, and as I got closer, small details started bothering me. His jacket had a patch that said rescue, but the lettering was slightly wrong, like it had been printed in a hurry, and the color of the patch was faded in a way the rest of his gear wasn't. His skis were old rentals, the kind with chipped top sheets and mismatched bindings, nothing like what patrol or rescue usually uses. And the radio on his chest had no mic cord running to his collar, just a dead unit, clipped on for show. He smiled when I stopped in front of him, but the smile didn't change his eyes. "You're lucky I saw you," he said. "If it gets dark, this side gets bad." I asked if he was ski patrol. He said, "Search and rescue with a little emphasis," like the label was supposed to settle everything. Then he looked over my shoulder into the trees and added, "You by yourself." The question made my skin prickle. I said my friends were at the lodge, and I was trying to get back. He nodded and pointed with his pole toward a narrow line between pines. "Trail's not far. This way. It's a quicker cut. Patrol doesn't like people using it because it crosses a service road." I glanced in the direction he indicated. There was no rope line, no marker, no sign of a service road, just a funnel of shadow. Still, he started moving slow enough that I could follow without thinking. "Stay close," he said. "Visibility's dropping." We slid between trees, and the world tightened. I kept expecting to see orange tape, or a groomer track something man-made. Instead, the snow got deeper, and the slope pitched steeper. The rescue guy kept looking back to make sure I was still behind him. Not to check my safety, but like a shepherd counting livestock. I asked how far it was. He said, "Couple minutes, and didn't look at me when he said it. His headlamp was on, yet it threw barely any light, like the batteries were dying, or like it was a prop. I tried to pull my phone out to check my location, and he noticed instantly. "Don't waste your battery," he said too quick. "Signal's trash here." He stopped at a small clearing, where the snow lay smooth and untouched. No tracks, no signs. He planted his poles and turned to face me fully. "What's your name?" he asked. "So I can log you." That word log felt wrong. Patrol takes info, sure, but they don't log you alone in the woods without a radio conversation without protocol. I asked where his team was. He lifted his radio and pressed the button without speaking, like he wanted me to see the gesture more than hear any response. No static. No voice. Nothing. He lowered it and said, "They're down low. I'm the forward." The lie was thin enough to see through, and once you see the lie, everything else sharpens. His gloves were dry and clean, no snow crust on them, which made no sense if he'd been out here helping people. The straps on his pack were tight, like it was empty. The skis under him weren't dusted with the powder we'd been moving through. He hadn't been skiing around searching. He'd been standing still somewhere clean, until he stepped into my path. I forced my voice to stay normal. "I'm going to head back the way I came," I said. "My friends are expecting me." His smile collapsed into something flatter. "No," he said quietly. "You can't. You'll just get more turned around. Come on." He reached out not to grab me, but to touch my sleeve like he was claiming me. I jerked back. In that same second, I heard a faint click from inside his jacket, like a small plastic latch, and I realized the radio might be hiding something else. He took a step closer and lowered his voice. "Listen, people get hurt out here. People freeze. I'm trying to keep you safe." The words were perfect, but the tone wasn't. It was the tone of someone reciting a script. My heart hammered, and I did the only thing I could do. On skis I moved. I pushed off hard to my right, aiming for a gap in the trees. He lunged, but skis aren't good for sudden grabs, and his pole basket caught on a branch. I heard him swear. I didn't look back. I just let gravity take me, weaving through trunks, taking hits from branches, my thighs burning, and my breath soaring in my throat. Behind me there was a sliding hiss that kept pace, not the clean sound of a good skier carving, but the desperate scraping of someone forcing speed. He was following. I cut left and nearly clipped a sapling, recovered, cut right, and then the terrain dropped into a gully that I hadn't seen. My skis bottomed, and I almost went over the handlebars, but the gully spit me out onto something flatter and wider. A service road. Real this time. Packed snow groomer tracks. Faint tire marks. I skated like my life depended on it, because it suddenly felt like it did. The sound behind me stopped at the gully, as if he didn't want to cross into a more obvious path. I risked a glance back. He stood at the edge of the tree's half-hidden headlamp, glowing weakly. He raised a hand and made a slow, beckoning motion like he was still offering help. Then he turned and disappeared into the timber, without leaving the service road, a single track to follow. I kept skating until I hit an open run, and then bombed it down to the nearest lift, base legs shaking so hard I could barely stand. I found a patrol shack with lights on and people inside, and blurted out what happened, expecting them to laugh. They didn't. The patroller I spoke to went very still when I described the jacket and the fake patch. He asked, "Did it have our crest?" I said no, it just said rescue. He swore and called it in. 10 minutes later, 2 more patrollers showed up, with a deputy and a real SAR volunteer. Real radios, real gear, real tired eyes. They asked me to point on a map where I'd met the guy. When I tried, I realized I couldn't find the clearing. The mountain had swallowed it. They searched anyway, ran dogs later that night and found nothing. No tracks, no lost tourist, no helpful rescuer. The next morning the resort issued a bland notice about staying within boundaries, like the danger was my decision-making, not the person wearing a costume. A week after I got home, I received an email from an address that looked official, with the subject line, "Incident Follow-Up." The message was one sentence: "You did the right thing by staying close." There was no signature. Attached was a photo taken from behind a tree, zoomed in on my back as I followed him into the shadows, my jacket bright against the snow, my head turned like I trusted him. I forwarded it to the deputy. He called me later and said the metadata showed the photo was taken with an old phone model and had been edited to strip location data. Then he said something I still hear when I'm alone. We've had reports of someone impersonating rescue before. They always pick people who look relieved to be found. After that, I stopped feeling grateful when strangers offered help in the woods. I started feeling alert. The first scream sounded like it came from inside the mountain. That's the only way I can describe it because it didn't travel through air the way sound should. It came up through the snow in a muffled, pressurized burst, like a voice trapped under a heavy blanket. I was on a late run near the edge of the resort, where the terrain rolls into small bowls and stands of trees, the kind of area that's fun during the day and eerie when the light fades. It was around 4:50 the hour when the mountain decides it's done entertaining you. The lifts were slowing, the sky was turning that dead winter purple, and the runs were emptying out fast. I'd stopped on the side of a groomed trail to tighten a boot buckle when I heard it help. Not loud, but close and wrong. It wasn't echoing from a distance. It was right under the surface, as if someone had their mouth pressed to snow and was trying to push sound through it. My body moved before I thought. I skated toward the sound, scanning the slope for any sign of an avalanche or a fall. There was a low berm beside the trail, where wind had piled snow into a soft drift, and the scream came from there. "Help me," it said, again, strained and wet. It sounded like a young man, maybe a teenager, and it had that edge of panic that turns your stomach. I dropped to my knees and started digging with my gloves. Snow filled my sleeves instantly. I tore at it like it was sand, expecting to hit a jacket, a helmet, a hand. The snow was surprisingly dense, packed by wind, and my fingers started to burn with cold. "Where are you?" I shouted, then felt stupid because shouting at a buried person doesn't help, but it made me feel less alone. The voice answered immediately. "Here, I'm right here." I dug faster, carving a trench into the drift. The voice was close enough that I could hear it inhale. Then it screamed again, longer this time, and as it screamed the sound shifted. Not faded, not echoed, but moved laterally, sliding under the snow from the drift to a spot a few feet away, like whoever was screaming was crawling beneath the surface. My hands froze in place. Snow doesn't do that. People buried in snow don't move their voice without moving their body, and if a body is buried you see something cracked, crust, a depression, a glove tip. There was nothing. The drift looked untouched except for my frantic hole. The voice came again now from the other side of me. "Please, I can't breathe." I spun, heart punching. For a second I thought I saw a slight rise in the snow, like a breath lifting a blanket. I reached toward it, and the voice suddenly screamed right beside my ear, so close I flinched hard enough to fall backward. I scraped my helmet against the crust and tasted panic. I forced myself to stop digging and do what you're supposed to do, call patrol. I fumbled my phone out with numb hands. No service. Of course. The mountain gave me one bar and then took it away. I looked up the trail. No one. The lift towers hummed in the distance, but the chairs were almost empty. The slope lights hadn't come on in this section, so the shadows were already pooling. I started skating uphill toward the nearest visible marker, planning to find a patroller or anyone with a radio. Behind me, the drift stayed perfectly still. Then the voice changed. It stopped pleading and got calm. Almost conversational, like someone had stopped acting because the audience was leaving. "Don't go," it said softly. I stopped, because my brain hates unfinished things. "I'm right here," it added. "You found me." The hair on my arms rose under my base layer. I turned slowly, keeping my poles between me and the drift, like that would matter. The snow was unbroken. No hand, no face, no hole, except the one I dug. I took one cautious step backward. The voice followed the movement, sliding under the surface, again tracking me. "You're leaving me," it said. And now the tone held something else. Resentment, accusation, like it was offended by my survival instinct. I backed away faster. The voice came from farther down the drift, keeping pace, always just beneath the crust. Then it did something that made my mouth go dry. It laughed. Not a big laugh, just a short, breathy chuckle as if it found the situation amusing. The laugh didn't sound muffled anymore. It sounded like it was in the air. I looked up, scanning the tree line. A figure stood between two pines, about 20 yards off the trail. Dark jacket, no helmet, no skis, just standing on snow like it didn't care about gravity. Its face was turned toward me, but the light was too flat to see features. The voice spoke again, and it was clearly coming from that figure now, not the snow. "You're fast," it called casual, like we were playing. My legs unlocked. I skated uphill hard poles, stabbing. Behind me, the figure didn't chase immediately. It just stepped out of the trees and walked toward the drift where I'd been digging. Then it dropped to its knees and slid forward, and the snow beneath it gave way like a trapdoor, swallowing it chest deep without resistance. The figure didn't flail. It sank smoothly, as if the mountain opened for it. A second later, the scream erupted again from inside the drift, identical to the first desperate, "Help." But now it carried a different cadence, like a recording being played back. My stomach turned. It was bait. It had been bait the whole time. I kept skating until I reached a ridge, where the trail widened and the last of the daylight held on. A ski patroller finally appeared, coming down slow with a headlamp and a radio. I nearly crashed into him, trying to stop. I told him there was someone buried beside the trail, screaming for help, and then I corrected myself mid-sentence because the words sounded insane. The patroller's face tightened anyway. He didn't laugh. He keyed his radio and called another patroller to meet us. Together we skied down to the drift. The area looked normal. My frantic hole was there, half filled with wind-blown snow, but there were no footprints around it except mine. The patroller knelt, listened, then leaned close like he expected to hear the voice too. We waited. The mountain was quiet. No scream. No plea. Nothing. The patroller stood up and said carefully that sometimes sound carries weirdly through snow-making pipes or drainage culverts, that people mistake it for voices. I wanted to accept that so badly I almost nodded. Then from inside the drift, right beneath where the patroller's knee had been, came a whisper, soft enough that only we could hear it. "You brought a friend." The patroller jerked back like he'd been burned. His hand went to his radio instantly. He didn't pretend anymore. He told me to ski out to the main run and not to stop, and then he and the other patroller started probing the drift with avalanche poles. Not digging like you do for a person, but jabbing like you're checking for something you don't want to. Touch. The probe hit nothing solid. No buddy. No gear. Just snow and emptiness. When we got back to the base, the patrol director took my statement and asked me quietly if the voice had called from the snow before I saw the figure. When I said yes, his jaw clenched. He told me they'd had reports like that years ago in that section. Always late day, always near wind drifts, always on low traffic connectors. He said they moved a marker once because guests kept stopping there. Then he said something that made me feel cold in a different way. We never find anyone. Not a victim. Not a prankster. Just people like you, shaken up with snow on their gloves. I went back to my hotel room and tried to sleep. Around 2:13 a.m., my phone lit up with a voicemail notification from an unknown number. I played it, expecting static or spam. Instead, I heard my own voice from earlier shouting into the drift. "Where are you?" There was a pause, and then the same calm reply, clearer than it had been on the mountain. "Here." Underneath it, barely audible, was the sound of snow being dug my digging, like someone had been recording me the whole time from the place I thought was empty. I didn't ski that connector again. I also stopped running toward every cry for help, without first making sure it belonged to a person above the snow, not something below it. We weren't supposed to be in the trees that day. Not really, but powder makes people brave in the dumbest way. The resort had opened a gladed area after a storm, and everyone kept talking about a secret line that dropped off the marked run and rejoined lower down. It sounded harmless, the way skiers say harmless things. Quick, cut, easy return. Follow the tracks. My buddy Nate led because he'd been here before, and I followed because I didn't want to be the cautious one again. The first 100 yards were exactly what the rumor promised. Soft snow, tight turns, that muffled, quiet. where the world feels insulated. Then the tracks we were following split, and Nate chose the left line without slowing like he'd committed. I hesitated, glanced back at the orange markers on the main run, and then dropped in after him. Within minutes, the trees got denser, the slope rolled into little gullies, and the familiar sounds of the resort vanished. We kept seeing old tracks, just enough to convince us other people had done it and lived, but the tracks kept disappearing under new snow. Then we popped into a small clearing and found something that didn't belong there. A cabin. Not a cute rental cabin with twinkle lights, but a rough, half-collapsed structure tucked against evergreens like someone built it to be forgotten. The roof sagged under snow load. The windows were black, either boarded or broken. A thin chimney pipe leaned at an angle like it had been punched. If you told me I'd accidentally skied into a movie set, I would have believed you, because the cabin looked staged, too perfectly wrong for the middle of a managed ski area. Nate grinned, like we'd found treasure. "Dude," he said, "I told you." I didn't grin. I was staring at the snow around it. There were no ski tracks leading up, no snowmobile marks, no recent boot prints. The snow in the clearing was smooth, except for our own. It made no sense that a building could exist here without any evidence of traffic, like it had been dropped onto the mountain by accident. Still, curiosity is a stronger drug than caution. Nate skied closer and stopped by the door, which hung crooked on one hinge. The air around the cabin smelled different, a faint sour tang under the clean cold like damp wood and something stale. I told him we should leave, that the line was already taking longer than it should. He ignored me, pushed the door open with his pole, and the hinge squealed loud enough to make birds jump in the trees. Inside was darker than it should have been because the windows were covered, but a thin beam of grey daylight slid through a crack and showed dust floating in it, like slow snow. Nate stepped in first. I stayed in the doorway, half in, half out, ready to bolt. The floor was packed dirt, with old planks laid across it. In the corner, there was a stove made from a rusted barrel. Beside it, a stack of split wood that looked too neatly arranged to be old. On the wall, someone had nailed up trail maps, real resort maps, years out of date, layered over each other like wallpaper. Nate laughed softly, the way you laugh in a place you know you shouldn't be. "Who even built this?" he whispered. Then he stopped laughing, because he'd noticed what I noticed. The barrel stove had ash in it that looked fresh, not grey and dead, but dark and clumpy, like it hadn't been cold for long. On the dirt floor, half hidden under a plank, was a line of melted snow that had refrozen into clear ice, as if boots had come in recently and tracked wetness inside. That was the moment the cabin stopped being a curiosity and became a problem. Nate backed up toward me, suddenly less brave. "I think someone's squatting here," he said, and his voice tried to sound casual, but it cracked. I told him we were leaving right now. As if the cabin heard me, something tapped on the outside wall. One sharp knock, then nothing. Nate froze. So did I. The knock came again slower, this time like whoever was outside wanted us to understand it wasn't the wind. Nate raised his voice and called out, "Hey, sorry, we're leaving." No answer, just the faint creak of wood settling, and then footsteps in the snow outside the cabin circling. Not stomping, not running, just a measured crunch. Pause. Crunch. Like someone pacing the perimeter and counting the seconds between our breaths. My heart started doing that ugly fast flutter that makes you feel trapped in your own ribs. I grabbed Nate's sleeve and pulled him out. We clipped out of the doorway and slid back into the clearing, and that's when I saw the detail that made my stomach drop. There were footprints now. Fresh ones, deep and clean, starting at the tree line and leading to the far side of the cabin. They weren't ours. They weren't ski boots either. Too narrow, too flat at the toe, like someone wearing regular winter boots. Whoever made them had approached while we were inside, and the snow had been so quiet we hadn't heard the first steps. Nate followed my stare and went pale. "We didn't hear anyone come up," he whispered. A shadow shifted behind the cabin, and a figure stepped into view. No skis, no polis. A dark jacket, hood up, face hidden. He stood still, just long enough to make sure we saw him, then lifted a hand and pointed not at us, but at the door we'd just left, like he wanted us back inside. The gesture was slow and confident, the kind you use when you know the other person's options are shrinking. "Nate did something stupid," he shouted. "We're calling patrol," like the threat itself was protection. The figure didn't flinch. He took one step forward, then another, and each step was perfectly balanced on snow that should have been deep and unstable. I yanked Nate's arm, and we pushed off, skiing straight out of the clearing into the trees, not caring about the line anymore, only caring about distance. Behind us, the crunching started again, too steady to be panic, too controlled to be a normal person, flailing in powder. We threaded through trunks, branches, slapping our helmets, and I kept expecting to hear the scrape of skis behind us. Instead, I heard boots, always boots, as if whoever it was didn't need skis to keep up. At one point, the terrain dropped into a shallow ravine, and our skis slid faster than our brains could process. We shot out onto a narrow bench and finally saw something man-made, a yellow snowmaking hose half buried under drifts running like a lifeline toward an open run. We followed it, skating and side-slipping lungs burning. The crunching behind us got closer whenever we slowed, then eased whenever we moved, like it was enjoying the control. When we broke out onto the groomed run, we didn't stop. We just pointed our skis downhill and went reckless and fast, until the base area lights grew bright and the sound of people returned. Only when we were surrounded by other skiers did we dare look back up the hill. There was no figure at the tree line, no movement, just the dark mouth of the glade and our frantic tracks leading out of it. We went straight to patrol and told them what happened, leaving out the part about ducking the line at first because shame makes you edit. The patroller we spoke to listened without interrupting, then asked one question that made my blood cool. Which cabin Nate described, the sagging roof and the barrel stove and the trail maps on the wall. The patroller's expression tightened, like he'd bitten something sour. He said there was no cabin in that zone. We insisted there was. He pulled out a laminated map and traced the area with a gloved finger. No structures, he said, like he was reading policy. Then he told us very evenly that years ago a maintenance shed had collapsed in a storm near a far boundary, and people still claim they saw it in the trees when visibility was low, but teams never found anything because nothing was supposed to be there anymore. When we pushed, he finally admitted they'd gotten occasional reports of someone living out there, but every time they went to investigate, they found only old wood and old tracks and nothing they could pin down. He asked if we'd touched anything inside. Nate said no. I lied and said no too. We left the patrol shack with our faces hot from adrenaline and embarrassment, and I realized the worst part wasn't the figure or the footprints. The worst part was how the mountain could hide a whole cabin until it decided you were ready to see it, and then act like you were crazy for believing your own eyes. Tree wells are one of those hazards you hear about in a safety video, and assume will never happen to you because you think you'll be the person who stays on the run and skis smart. I thought that too right up until the mountain swallowed me in complete silence. It was mid-morning after an overnight dump, the kind of day where the trees are coated in white, and every turn throws powder up to your chest. My friends wanted to lap the glades because the snow stayed soft under the canopy, and I went because it was fun, and because the resort ropes were open and patrol had marked it as inbounds. We took a mellow line at first, weaving between spruce and fir, and then the group stretched out the way groups always do, one person faster, one stopping to film, one taking a detour. I ended up alone for a minute, not far from the run, or so I told myself. I remember seeing a fat evergreen on my right, with branches drooping low, a perfect powder skirt around its base. I aimed left to avoid it, caught an edge in a hidden dip, and in the same instant my skis shot sideways. My upper body pitched forward, my poles planted and yanked, and my momentum carried me directly into the soft ring of snow at the tree's base. There wasn't a dramatic crash. There was no impact. The snow simply gave way like a trapdoor, and I dropped. 1 second my goggles were full of daylight. The next second, they were full of white, then green, then black. My body rotated as I fell, and I landed head first upside down with my skis still above me, somewhere anchored by branches and my own bindings. The snow around the trunk wasn't packed. It was a hollow, a void formed by the tree's heat and the way powder bridges over empty space. It wrapped me instantly dense and cold, pressing on my shoulders and helmet so tight I couldn't lift my head. For a beat, my brain refused to understand the position I was in. Then I tried to inhale, and the snow shifted and filled the space around my mouth with icy dust. Panic hit like a physical blow. I tried to shout and heard only a muffled grunt. I tried to push myself up, and my arms sank into powder that offered no leverage. My paws were pinned awkwardly, one strap biting my wrist. My chest was compressed at an angle that made breathing feel shallow and expensive. I forced myself to stop thrashing because I remembered the one rule every patroller repeats: struggling makes you sink deeper. So I went, still, and listened. Above me, the world sounded far away, like I was at the bottom of a swimming pool. I could hear faint wind in the branches, and somewhere distant the hiss of skis on snow. I tried to call my friends by name, slow and loud. The sound came out as a weak moan that the snow swallowed before it traveled a foot. My phone was in my jacket pocket, but reaching it felt impossible because my arms were wedged and my shoulders were pressed tight to the trunk. I tried anyway, inching one hand toward my chest, fighting the numb burn in my fingers. The movement loosened the snow near my face, and a small cascade poured down over my goggles and into the gap by my nose. I choked and coughed, and the cough pulled more snow into my mouth. That was the first time I truly believed I could die in a place that was technically in bounds. I closed my mouth and breathed through my nose, tiny sips, and focused on one task: to make a pocket of air. I wiggled my helmet just enough to compress the snow into a dome near my face. It helped, but it also reminded me how tight everything was. Claustrophobia isn't just fear. It's your body screaming at you that the space is wrong. Minutes stretched. My legs started to tingle, then go numb, then tingle again in a painful way that made me worry about blood flow. Then I heard something close. Not skis. Not the distant slope noise, but a careful crunching in the powder above me right near the tree. Relief surged so hard I almost sobbed. I tried to shout again, and the sound that came out was pathetic. The crunching paused. Then I heard a voice, low and amused, as if it had expected to find me. "Well," it said, "look at that." My relief curdled. A rescuer doesn't sound entertained. A friend doesn't narrate. I tried to say, "Help me," but it came out as a wet rasp. The voice leaned closer. I couldn't see the person, but I could feel the vibration of sound through snow, like someone speaking directly into the hole. "You fell right where people disappear," it said, almost conversational. I forced the words out through clenched teeth. "Please, go get patrol." A soft laugh. "Patrol. They'll probe around. They'll call your name. You'll answer like that, and they'll think the wind is messing with them." I froze. The cruelty and the logic made my stomach twist. I waited for the person to dig, to do anything. Instead, I heard the scrape of fabric and the tiny click of a phone camera. Someone was filming. "Hold still," the voice said gently. "It's better if you don't fight it." Something touched my ski boot above me. Not a grab, more like a test. And my body sank a fraction deeper as snow collapsed around my torso. I tried to kick, and the motion packed the snow tighter against my ribs. Pain flared. I couldn't tell if I was sinking or if my brain was inventing it, but the sensation was enough to shred my control. I forced myself to go still again, because stillness was the only weapon I had. Above, the voice hummed, once idle like it was waiting for something. Then from farther away I heard another sound. Fast, aggressive, skiing someone, cutting hard through powder. A shout followed, sharper and more panicked than mine. "Hey," a second voice yelled. "Where are you?" It was my friend Jenna. I recognized her immediately. I tried to answer, and managed only a broken groan. The second voice got closer, and I heard branches snap as someone pushed through the trees. The amused voice above me changed instantly, like a switch flipped. It went quiet. The crunching retreated 2 steps, then free, moving away from the hole. Jenna shouted my name, again. I summoned everything in my chest and pushed a sound out, not words, just noise. It was enough. Jenna's skis stopped. "Oh my God," she said, and then snow started moving as she dropped to her knees. She dug with bare hands, fast and furious, and snow poured down onto my face with every scoop. It was terrifying, but it was the right kind of terrifying because it meant someone was actually there. "Don't pull me," I rasped, remembering another rule. "You dig around, you don't yank." Jenna was crying and swearing and digging anyway, making a trench beside the trunk. Within seconds another friend arrived, then another, and finally the calm voice of a patroller, breathless from skating in. They worked with practiced urgency, carving a slot, so my torso could rotate, supporting my head, so I didn't sink. When they finally hauled me out, my body came free with a suction-like release, and I collapsed onto the snow, shaking so hard, my teeth clacked. The patroller kept asking, "Were you alone? Did anyone else come by?" I tried to tell him about the voice in the filming, but my words came out ragged. Jenna cut in, saying she heard someone near the tree, right before she found me, like footsteps backing away. The patroller's eyes narrowed. He scanned the trees and then keyed his radio, calling for another unit to sweep the area. They never found anyone. No tracks that made sense because the new snow was deep and the tree cover breaks prints, and because in a place like that a person can step off a line and vanish. Back at the patrol shack, they treated me for shock and made me drink something warm until my hands stopped clawing. A supervisor took my statement and said the obvious things about tree wells and staying with a buddy. Then he added something less obvious, something he said like he didn't want it repeated. "If you ever hear a voice down in a hole, don't assume it's a skier." He wouldn't explain. He just looked past me toward the window, toward the trees. That night in the hotel, my phone showed a new airdrop request from an unknown device. The file name was a timestamp that matched the minute I was stuck. The preview image was a photo of my upside-down goggles and my snow-dusted face, eyes wide, taken from the lip of the hole. Under it as a caption, 3 words, "Stay very still." I turned airdrop off forever after that. But what I couldn't turn off was the memory of that amused voice above me, calm, as if it owned the mountain, treating my panic like entertainment. Now, when I ski trees, I give every big evergreen a wide berth, and if I hear crunching nearby, I don't feel relief first anymore. I feel the urge to get out while I still can. Night skiing makes a resort feel like a different planet because the light is artificial and selective, and everything beyond the floodlit runs turns into a wall of black trees. People think that means safer because you can see the trail and there are still employees around, but it also means you can't see what's watching from just outside the light. This happened on a Friday when the resort was running night ops until 9:00, and I stayed later than my friends because I wanted one more lap before last chair. The base area was lively music, kids in rented helmets wobbling to the lift, the smell of chili drifting out of the launch. But higher up the mountain, the crowds thinned into small clusters of headlamps and bright jackets. The temperature dropped fast after dark, and the groomed snow hardened into that slick, squeaky surface that feels like polished plastic under your edges. I took the lift up around 8:35 and noticed the line behind me was almost empty. The lifty at the top station was yawning shoulders, hunched like he'd already checked out. I pushed off and skied down a wide intermediate run that funneled into a steeper pitch midway, the kind of slope that looks gentle in daylight and suddenly feels exposed when you're staring down it under lights. Halfway down the pitch, I saw a person standing dead center in the run, right in the brightest pool of floodlight, as if they'd stepped there on purpose. At first, my brain labeled him beginner and moved on, because beginners stop in stupid places all the time. But then I registered what was wrong. He wasn't on skis. He wasn't holding poles. He was standing with both feet planted, shoulders squared to the hill, arms at his sides, and he wasn't wobbling or shifting weight like someone trying not to slide. He was just there, upright and still on a slope that should have forced motion. I scrubbed speed and yelled the automatic thing skiers yell when someone's blocking the line. Something like, "On your left." He didn't react. No flinch, no head turn, no gesture that said he heard me. My heart rate bumped up, not from effort, but from the sudden awareness that this wasn't normal resort behavior. I cut my line wider to pass him with room, and as I approached, the light revealed more details that made my stomach tighten. He wore dark winter boots, not ski boots, and his jacket was plain black, no reflective strips, no logo, no bright color. No helmet, no goggles. His face was angled slightly downward as if he were watching the snow, but I couldn't see features because the brim of his hood threw shadow. I slowed almost to a stop, uncertain whether to pass or turn, uphill and bail out. And that hesitation felt like a mistake the second I felt it. When I was maybe 10 feet away, he lifted his head and looked straight at me. The motion was small, but it carried intention, and his eyes caught the light in a way that felt wrong, too flat, like they weren't reflecting, like he was looking through me rather than at me. I forced myself to keep moving because stopping near him felt worse than passing him, so I glided by, trying to keep my body loose and my edges engaged. As I passed, he spoke, and the calmness of his voice was what hit me hardest. "You're out late," he said, conversational like we were two people in a grocery store aisle. I didn't answer. I kept my gaze downhill and pushed my poles once harder than necessary. He turned his head to follow me, and I heard his boots scrape the hardpack one step then another, as if he was walking down the slope behind me without sliding. That should have been impossible, and my brain tried to rationalize it as traction spikes or some weird stance, but the sound kept coming in a steady rhythm that matched my speed. Not rushing, not falling away. Matching. I stole a glance back and saw him moving, but not like a person struggling on a steep run. He looked balanced, almost casual, walking diagonally down the pitch as if gravity didn't matter to him the way it mattered to everyone else. I felt the urge to sprint on skis, that panicky impulse to bomb straight down, but night ice punishes that instinct, so I held control and aimed for the lower runout where I knew there would be more people. The lights ahead looked warmer, more crowded, and I told myself once I reached them this weirdness would evaporate into normal. Then the man called again louder, and this time he used my name. "Hey Mark." I almost caught an edge from the shock of it. I do not have a common name, and I had not told it to anyone on that lift. I checked my jacket for my pass like it was printed somewhere obvious, and remembered my season pass had my name on it in small letters. Still, he shouldn't have been close enough to read it from behind, unless he'd been watching earlier closer than I'd ever felt. My breath turned sharp in my throat. I pushed harder. The run flattened and widened, and I finally heard other skiers again, the scrape of edges and the laughter of a couple near the side. Relief surged, messy and immediate. I looked back, expecting to see the man retreat into darkness, now that there were witnesses. Instead, he was still there, walking just inside the edge of the floodlight, hood-up face, hidden head, turned toward me, as if he could see me clearer than I could see him. A family skied between us, and for a second the man was blocked by their bright jackets. When they passed, he was gone. Not farther uphill, not in the trees, not standing still, just gone. Erased like a glitch. I coasted to the bottom, and went straight into the lodge, pretending I needed water, forcing myself to be surrounded by noise. I told myself I'd imagined the name. I told myself it was an employee, messing around, though that explanation felt weak. I found a patroller near the door, and described the man as casually as I could, like I didn't want to sound dramatic. The patroller's expression shifted the second I mentioned boots, and standing in the middle of the pitch, he asked, "What run? What time? What light tower?" I answered, and he keyed his radio voice, suddenly clipped. 2 patrollers went up on snowmobiles. Another pulled up the camera feeds for that run. Yes, the resort had cameras on the main night trails, and invited me to watch. I expected to see myself skiing down, expected to see a dark figure standing center slope. The screen showed the run under harsh floodlights, skiers carving through small, bright dots, moving like fish in an aquarium. At 8:41 I appeared, and my line did the exact hesitation I remembered. But the center of the run was empty. No man. No obstacle. Nothing that would explain my near stop. The patroller rewound and played it again, then zoomed, then switched cameras. In one angle, just one, there was a faint smear of darkness in the center of the run for 2 seconds, like a shadow, with edges too soft to be a person. The patroller stared at it, jaw tight. "Probably lens flare," he said, but his tone didn't believe his own words. A minute later, his radio crackled, and one of the snowmobile patrollers said they found fresh boot scuffs mid-slope, right where I'd described, but no tracks leading in or out, like the boots had appeared there and then lifted away. The patroller beside me exhaled slowly and told me to stay in the lodge until my friends arrived, like he didn't want me outside, alone, even in the base area. I did, and I tried to laugh it off with my friends, but my laughter sounded thin. Later that night in bed, I checked my phone and found a photo I hadn't taken. It was a zoom shot of a floodlit run at night, slightly grainy, taken from the side of the slope. In the center of the frame, a dark figure stood perfectly still, and if you zoomed closer, you could just make out the pale oval of a face angled toward the camera. The timestamp was 8:39, 2 minutes before I reached that pitch. The photo had no sender, no location data, and the only text beneath it was a message that turned my stomach cold. I like it when you don't answer. The only reason I'm alive to tell this one is because my binding failed in the one place on the mountain where a fall doesn't automatically mean a cliff, a tree, or a collision. It happened the morning after the night slope incident, and at first I didn't connect the two, because most people don't want to believe someone would reach into your gear and adjust the one piece of equipment designed to keep your body intact. I'd left my skis in the hotel ski room overnight, the kind of locked storage area off the lobby, where everyone stacks their stuff on wooden racks and trusts the staff to keep an eye on it. It was convenient, and I'd used it 100 times. That morning the sky was clear and brutally cold, the kind of cold that makes metal feel sharper. I clicked into my bindings outside the hotel, heard the familiar snap, and everything felt normal. The first run was a fast groomer to warm up firm corduroy with a little sheen. Halfway down, I set an edge into a mild carve, and felt my right ski detach. Not a gradual loosen, but a full violent release at speed, like someone yanked the ski off my foot. My boot shot forward, and my body pitched into a slide. I managed to keep my head up and my arms in, and I slid long enough to grind fear into my spine. When I stopped, my ski was spinning downhill without me, until it caught an edge and flipped. For a moment I just sat there, listening to my heartbeat and the distant hiss of other skiers trying to understand how a binding could release on a clean carve when I wasn't falling. I collected the ski, brushed snow away, and clicked back in. It snapped in again too easily, like the mechanism was loose. I checked the DIN setting out of habit and felt my stomach drop. It was set at a number so low it might as well have been child learning wedge. I never ski at that setting. I've had the same DIN for years, and I know exactly where I keep it. Someone had turned it down, and not by one click accidentally, by multiple full rotations. I stood on the side of the run with my glove on the adjustment screw, staring at it as if it might explain itself. I told myself maybe a rental tech had adjusted it at the resort the day before, but these were my own skis, not rentals, and nobody touches your bindings unless you ask. I cranked the DIN back where it belonged and finished the run, slow heart still racing. At the base, I went straight to the ski shop and asked if they could inspect my bindings for a malfunction. I didn't mention sabotage, because saying that out loud felt like inviting someone to laugh at me. The tech put my skis on the bench, checked the toe and heel pieces, tested release tension. "These are fine," he said, then paused at the DIN indicators and looked up at me. "But these were definitely turned down," he added, like he couldn't ignore it. "Did you have someone adjust them?" I said no. He frowned and asked if I'd stored them somewhere, shared. I told him about the hotel ski room. He tightened his mouth and said quietly, "Yeah, that's a thing." I asked what he meant. He shrugged like he didn't want liability in his mouth. "People mess with gear. Usually pranks. Sometimes worse." He reset everything, marked the screws with a tiny paint pen line, an old mechanic trick so you can tell if anything shifts. If the lines don't match later, he said someone touched it. I left the shop with my skis, feeling both safer and more exposed, because now the danger wasn't accident. It was person. I decided to ski anyway, because walking off the mountain felt like letting fear win, and because daylight makes you arrogant. 2 runs later, on a steeper pitch, my left ski pre-released on a small bump, again, not during a fall. This time I stayed upright by pure reflex, catching myself on one ski while the other popped loose and skittered sideways. The paint pen mark on the heel screw was no longer aligned. Someone had turned it again. Not hours later, in a workshop. Recently. Today. My mouth went dry. I looked uphill, expecting to see a friend pranking me or a stranger laughing. All I saw was the normal stream of skiers, and the empty, indifferent slope. I scooped the loose ski, carried both to the side, and did the fastest, ugliest survey of my surroundings I've ever done, who had been close enough to my skis to touch them without me noticing. My skis had been in my hands at the base, in the lift, line, in the chair, with me. Unless someone had reached in while we were loaded tight like sardines at the chairlift. The only other time my skis were out of my sight was when I went into the lodge bathroom between runs. 5 minutes, maybe. Long enough for someone who knew what to do. I skied down slowly, not trusting any turn, and went straight to patrol. This time I did say the word sabotage. I expected skepticism. Instead, the patroller's face hardened immediately, and he asked to see the bindings. He crouched, checked the settings, and pointed at the shifted paint mark. "You had these marked?" he asked. I nodded. He stood up and scanned the base area, the way cops scan crowds, not the way resort staff scan for lost kids. He took my name and number, asked where I was staying, then asked a question that made my stomach knot. "Did anything weird happen to you last night?" I told him about the man on the slope. The patroller didn't look surprised. He looked tired. He told me to keep my skis with me at all times, not in the rack, not in storage, and if I had to use the restroom, bring them inside or ask patrol to hold them behind the counter. I almost laughed at the absurdity of carrying skis into a bathroom, but the urge died when he added, "We've had 2 incidents this month. One guy tore his ACL. One woman broke her wrist. Both said their bindings felt wrong right before." He said wrong with emphasis, like it was a word people use when they don't want to admit they were targeted. Patrol walked me to guest services and pulled footage from the base cameras around the time I'd been in the lodge. From one angle you could see the ski racks and the lodge entrance, a messy blur of jackets and helmets. My skis were visible, leaned against the rack for a moment because I'd set them down while adjusting my boot. The camera quality wasn't great, and bodies moved through frame constantly. But at 1122, a person in a black jacket stepped close to my skis, knelt as if tying a boot, and their hand disappeared behind the binding for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is all it takes if you know exactly what screw to touch. The person stood blended back into the crowd and never looked up at the camera. The patroller froze the frame and zoomed until the pixels broke apart. You couldn't see a face. You could see one detail, though the person wasn't wearing ski gloves. They were wearing thin black work gloves, the kind that keep dexterity. The same kind of gloves you'd wear if you needed to turn a small screw quickly in the cold. Patrol offered to call the police. I agreed. A deputy arrived and took a report. Asked where I'd stored my skis overnight. Asked if I'd had any conflicts, any arguments, any reason someone would target me. I said no. And as I said it, I realized how wrong that was. Because you don't need to argue with someone for them to pick you. You just need to be alone at the right moment. The deputy told me flatly to stop skiing for the day. I wanted to protest. Then I remembered the calm voice on the night slope. Using my name and the protest died. I took my skis back to the hotel and refused to use the ski room. I brought them into my room like they were a pet I didn't trust outside. That night, around 9:40, someone slid a folded piece of paper under my door. No knock, no footsteps, just paper like a receipt. I opened it and found a simple diagram drawn in pen, a binding screw circled with an arrow like an instruction. Underneath one sentence in clean block letters, "It's amazing what you'll let go of without noticing." I turned the deadbolt and the chain and then sat on the edge of the bed staring at my skis because for the first time the mountain didn't feel like the fret. The fret felt like the person who could stand in a crowd, touch your gear, and then vanish back into normal life while you try to convince yourself it was just bad luck. The worst thing about resort hotels is how they convince you you're safe because everything is on property, which really just means strangers have more keys than you do. I learned that on a weekend when my friends and I booked rooms in the main lodge building so we could walk to the lifts, stumble back from April, and not think too hard about anything except snow conditions. The place looked like every ski hotel brochure. Stone fireplace, mounted antlers, framed vintage trail maps, warm lighting that made the cold outside feel like a feature instead of a threat. I checked in around 6. 30 got a plastic keycard and rode the elevator to the 4th floor with that pleasant, tired feeling you get after a full day on the mountain. My room was at the end of the hall, quiet, with a balcony that faced the trees and a little view of the lower runs. I dropped my gear in a pile, took a hot shower and put on a hoodie, planning to meet my friends downstairs in 20 minutes. That's when the first weird thing happened. The bathroom door, which I'm sure I'd latched, drifted open on its own. I blamed the ventilation pressure. Old buildings breathe. I shut it, latched it, and turned to grab my wallet. Behind me, the door clicked again, the tiny plastic sound of a latch releasing. I felt that prickly awareness of being watched, the same instinct that had saved me in the locker room months earlier. I froze and listened. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the heater and faint laughter somewhere down the hall. Then I heard the softest noise at the main door, not a knock, but the whisper of a keycard swiping. One beep. Another beep. The lock clicked. My stomach tightened so hard I had to force air into my lungs. I hadn't put the do not disturb sign out because I wasn't even staying in the room, and I hadn't deadbolted the door because I'd assumed the keycard system meant something. The door opened 2 inches slow, like whoever was on the other side was testing whether I was inside. A man's voice slipped through the gap, low and casual. "Maintenance," he said, as if the word itself granted permission. I didn't answer. I grabbed my phone off the dresser and held it at chest height like a weapon I didn't believe in. The door opened wider. A man stepped in, wearing a dark maintenance uniform with a small logo patch, a knit beanie, and a set of keys clipped to his belt that chimed softly when he moved. He didn't look surprised to see me. That's what made it worse. If he'd been genuinely mistaken, you'd expect an apology, a flinch, something human. Instead, he gave me a quick smile and glanced around the room like he was already familiar with the layout. "Just checking the thermostat," he said, and his eyes flicked to the wall unit near the window. I asked why he was in my room. He kept his voice calm, almost bored. "We've got a work order," he said. "Heat issues. These rooms drop fast. We're making sure nobody freezes tonight." It sounded reasonable in that polished way lies often do. I asked what room he meant. He looked at my door number, then back at me without missing a beat. "Yeah, this one," he said. "You might not have noticed it yet." I told him I hadn't requested anything. He shrugged. "Could have been flagged from the system," he said, and stepped farther into the room toward the window as if I'd already agreed. His confidence was invasive. I moved to keep distance between us and the bed, because I didn't like how his gaze kept touching my belongings, pausing on my wallet on the nightstand, my phone charger, the open suitcase. He reached the thermostat and put a hand on it, but he didn't adjust anything. He just stood there, with his hand resting on the plastic, like a prop eyes, scanning. "You here alone?" he asked, too casually. I felt anger flare through the fear. "Why do you need to know?" that I said. His smile tightened. "Just making conversation," he replied. "A lot of people come up here and get into trouble. Drink too much. Lose their keycards. You know." He said it like he was offering friendly advice, but the sentence was a net. Lose your keycard, and someone else can walk into your room and call it normal. I told him to leave. He didn't move right away. He looked toward the balcony door, then back at me. "Door latches on. These are finicky," he said. "Wind can push them open." I hadn't mentioned the balcony. I hadn't mentioned any door. The only way he'd know that was if he'd been in this room before, or in enough rooms like it that he'd made mental notes about vulnerabilities. My pulse climbed. I raised my phone and said I was recording. That finally shifted something in him. His eyes sharpened like he was recalculating. "No need for that," he said, and stepped toward the door, keys jangling. As he passed me close enough that I smelled cold air and machine grease on his jacket, he murmured almost kindly, "You should deadbolt at night. Keycards aren't what people think." Then he left, and the door clicked shut behind him with a soft finality that felt like a warning. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the lock, waiting for the beep-beep click again. It didn't come. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I went straight to the front desk, in my hoodie and socks, ignoring the weird looks from guests in ski boots, and told the clerk a maintenance worker had entered my room without permission. The clerk did the polite hotel face at first, the one that says inconvenience, not danger. "Do you remember his name?" she asked. I said no. I described him. The uniform, the keys, the way he said work order. She typed, frowned, and said, "Maintenance shouldn't be in rooms without scheduling, unless it was an emergency." I asked her to check whether there was a work order for my room. She checked again slower, then said no. Her expression changed a tiny crack in the professional calm. She called a manager. The manager arrived, apologized, and promised they'd look into it, which is hotel language for "please stop making a scene." I demanded they rekey my room and disable any master access from maintenance. The manager said they couldn't disable master keys because that's how hotels function. That answer was the moment I realized this wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the system. They did rekey my room, gave me new cards, and said only the front desk and security had master access. I asked for security to walk me back. A guard did friendly and bored, and watched me deadbolt the door like I was auditioning for Paranoia. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. Around 1:17 a.m. I woke up to the softest sound the keycard reader beeping in the dark. One beep, another, then the click of the latch trying to disengage. The deadbolt held, but the handle moved slightly as someone tested it. I sat up so fast my neck cramped. I didn't shout. I didn't move toward the door. I held my breath and listened the way prey listens. The beep stopped. For a few seconds there was nothing, and then a whisper so close it felt like it came through the peephole. "It's okay. I just needed to make sure you locked it." I stayed frozen until I heard footsteps retreat down the hall, unhurried. The next morning the manager showed me the electronic lock log, trying to prove nothing happened. It showed my old keycards were deactivated at 7:12 p.m. It showed my new keycards being used at 7:15 p.m. It showed no entries at 1:17 m. "See," he said, relief in his voice, like the absence of proof erased the experience. Then I noticed one line the manager's finger didn't touch at 1:16 a.m. The lock registered a maintenance override attempt, and at 1:16:05 it registered bolt engaged. The manager stared at it like he'd never seen those words before. I asked who had the override tool. He said only security and maintenance supervisors. I asked to see the camera at the end of the hall. He said it had been intermittent since the last storm. When I checked out, I didn't leave my skis in the hotel room for a second. I carried everything with me, and I watched every employee, like they had a second job. In the parking lot, I looked back at the 4th-floor balcony and saw a person standing behind the glass door of my old room, just a shadow shape with a beanie head tilted as if he was watching me leave. I blinked, and the room was empty again. I reported it to the police in the nearest town. They took notes, nodded, and asked if anything was stolen. Nothing had been stolen. That almost felt like the point, because the real theft was simpler. He'd taken the idea that a locked hotel room means privacy, and he'd made it feel childish. To this day, if I hear a keycard beep in a hallway at night, my body wakes up before my mind does. The knock on the balcony door was so gentle I almost ignored it, because nobody expects a visitor on a 4th-floor balcony in the middle of winter, and your brain will do anything to keep a world like that from being real. I was staying at a slopeside hotel. Again, different resort, different year, but the same architecture, long corridors, identical doors and balconies that looked charming in daytime and insane after dark. It was snowing lightly, the slow, dry kind that makes the outside look quiet and harmless. And I'd gone to bed early because we had first chair plans. Around 2:40 a.m. I woke up to the sound of wind, worrying the building, that low whistle that slips through balcony seals, and then I heard it 3 soft taps on glass. Tap, 2, tap, tap. Not random, not the wind throwing sleet, the rhythm of knuckles. I lay there, with my eyes open, trying to decide whether I'd dreamed it. Then it came again, slightly louder, directly from the balcony door. My heart started that ugly fast stutter. I reached for my phone, turned the brightness down, and looked at the room. The curtains were half open because I'd liked the view earlier. Dark trees, a slice of run lit faintly by distant base lights, and the balcony railing dusted with snow. The glass door reflected my bed, and my face, pale and awake. I didn't see anyone outside, but the balcony was mostly shadow, and shadow is a liar. 2. Tap, tap, tap. This time, I heard a faint scrape afterward, like something brushing the door frame. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to sit up and turn on the bedside lamp, because light feels like control even when it isn't. The lamp threw warm yellow onto the bed and the carpet, but the balcony beyond the glass stayed dark, as if the night refused to accept the room's rules. I crept toward the door and stopped several feet short, because getting close felt like offering myself. "Who is it?" I called, and my voice sounded thin. No answer. Tap, tap, tap. The taps moved slightly higher on the glass, as if whoever was outside had leaned in and wanted me to come closer. I told myself it had to be a drunk guest who'd gotten on the wrong balcony. But that theory collapsed instantly, because balconies on higher floors don't connect. They're separated by solid dividers and empty air. You can't wander onto the wrong one without climbing. I thought about calling the front desk, but in that moment I didn't want to make noise, didn't want to announce to the hallway that I was awake and alone. I did it anyway. I dialed the hotel number, and it rang once, twice, then went to a recorded message about after-hours assistance. The resort was still running, but the hotel desk was apparently staffed by nobody, who answers at 240A. M. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was patient, almost polite, and that patience felt like the scariest thing of all. I moved to the curtains and pulled them closed in one fast motion, shutting the outside out. The tap stopped. For 3 seconds there was nothing, and I felt my muscles unclench slightly. Then the knock came again, right where the curtains now covered the glass, muffled but unmistakable. Whoever was out there knew exactly where I was standing. I backed away until I hit the bed. I slid the deadbolt on the main door, even though the sound was at the balcony. My brain kept trying to solve the physics. 4th floor snowing, no fire escape, no ladder that high without noise. The balcony railing itself was visible earlier and looked clean. So how was someone there now? The knock changed. It became a slow dragging sound, like a fingertip moving down the glass, as if someone was tracing. Then softly a voice came through, low enough that it might have been the wind if it hadn't formed words. "I can see you," it said. The sentence wasn't shouted. It was delivered with calm certainty, like a person stating the time. My stomach twisted. I backed into the bathroom and shut the door, because a closed door feels like a smaller world, and smaller worlds feel manageable. Inside the bathroom, I locked the latch and sat on the tile floor with my phone in my hands, trying to decide whether to call 911 and explain that someone was on my balcony in a way that sounded impossible. While I sat there, I heard the balcony door handle jiggle once gently, like someone testing whether it was locked. It was. The jiggle stopped, and from the bedroom I heard another sound that made my scalp tighten, a soft thud on the balcony floor like a boot landing. Then another, like a step. Whoever it was wasn't just at the door. They were moving around out there. I forced myself to call 911 anyway. The dispatcher answered, asked my location, asked what was happening. I whispered the details, feeling ridiculous and terrified at the same time. The dispatcher told me to stay inside, to not open any doors, and that officers were on the way. I told her the person was on the balcony, 4th floor. There was a pause in her voice, a tiny recalibration, and then she said, "Okay," in a way that didn't sound convinced, but did sound careful. While I waited, the sounds outside changed again. The knocking stopped entirely. The footsteps moved away from the door, toward the far end of the balcony, where the railing met the divider. Then came a scraping sound, slow and deliberate, like something being dragged along metal. I pictured a gloved hand on the railing, leaving a line in the snow. I pictured a person peering around the divider, trying to find a way onto the next balcony, even though there wasn't one. The scraping continued for several seconds, then stopped. Silence pressed against the glass. I didn't leave the bathroom until I heard a hard knock on the main door and a voice calling, "Police." 2 officers entered, asked me to stay behind them, and cleared the room with professional boredom that shifted into alertness the moment they saw the balcony door. One of them shone a flashlight through the curtains and then pulled the curtains aside. The balcony was empty. Snow lay on the floor in a thin, even layer, except for a line near the railing, where the snow had been disturbed. The officer opened the balcony door cautiously and stepped out. He looked down at the balcony floor, then up at the divider, then back at me. "There's no footprints," he said, confused. I stepped close enough to see what he meant. The snow on the balcony had no boot prints leading to the door, no steps, no approach. It looked untouched, like nobody had ever stood there. The only mark was a long, shallow dragline along the railing, as if something had been pulled across it without ever stepping onto the floor. The officer leaned over the railing and shone his light down the side of the building. The wall was smooth, iced in places, with no ladder, no rope, no obvious handholds. He looked at me like he wanted an explanation that didn't exist. The second officer checked the hallway camera feed with hotel security, and the security guy, half asleep, irritated, said nothing. Showed anyone in the corridor near my room during the time I called. Could have been the wind, he suggested automatically, because wind is the only explanation that keeps the world sane. The officers didn't push that explanation very hard. They asked me to play them the recording I'd started on my phone from inside the bathroom. I hadn't even remembered hitting record, but there it was, a 2-minute audio clip. In the clip you can hear the taps clearly. The handle jiggled the soft thuds, and then the voice quiet but distinct, "I can see you." When the officer heard it, his face tightened. He didn't say it was the wind. He said, "We're going to do another sweep," and asked the hotel to check every balcony door latch in the wing. The hotel staff treated it like an inconvenience until the next part happened. As the officers were leaving, the younger one paused at the balcony and pointed to the top edge of the glass door frame. "What's that?" he asked. In the flashlight beam, there were tiny crystals where frost had been scraped away, forming a faint smear like a palm print had pressed there and warmed it enough to melt and refreeze. But it wasn't at normal hand height. It was higher near the top of the frame, as if someone very tall or someone elevated had leaned in close. The officer took a photo and asked whether anyone on staff could access balconies from above. The security guy finally admitted there was a roof maintenance walkway and that contractors sometimes used it to check ice buildup. Sometimes, he said, eyes avoiding mine. The officers went upstairs. 20 minutes later they returned and told me they found fresh scuff marks near the roof access hatch and a length of thin utility rope coiled neatly behind an HVAC unit, still damp with snow as if it had been used and then hidden quickly. No person. No suspect. Just the tools of someone who understood height and silence. The hotel offered to move me to an interior room with no balcony. I accepted immediately because pride is useless when you're being tested. At 5:12 a.m. In the new room, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No text, just a photo attachment. It was taken from above, looking down at my original balcony door, the curtains half open, my bedroom lamp on, and me standing near the bed in a hoodie, frozen mid-decision. The angle was impossible, unless the camera was outside suspended watching through the glass from the balcony itself. Under the photo were 4 words that made my throat go tight. "You didn't look." I didn't ski the next day. I drove home in daylight with the heat blasting and my hands still cold on the steering wheel because the real lesson wasn't that someone can reach a 4th-floor balcony. The lesson was that someone wanted me to know they could, and they had the patience to prove it in the quietest way possible. I used to think ski instructors were the safest strangers on a mountain because they're vetted, uniformed, and surrounded by people, but that's only true when the uniform means what you think it means. This started as a normal group lesson I booked last minute because my friends were better skiers, and I was tired of being the one who held everyone back on steeper terrain. The resort assigned me to an instructor named Cal, mid-30s friendly in a practiced way, with mirrored goggles, and that relaxed stance people get when they've spent years on snow. He complimented my gear, corrected my posture, and spoke with the confidence that makes you trust him before you've earned it. The first red flag was tiny. He already knew my first name without looking at my pass, and when I asked how, he smiled and said, "I read people fast." I laughed because it sounded like a harmless line. He spent most of the lesson hovering closer than necessary, guiding my hips, with gloved hands adjusting my shoulders, leaning in to talk, even when the wind wasn't loud. It was awkward, but I told myself I was being sensitive after everything else that had happened on ski trips. At the end, he didn't just say goodbye and skate off to his next group. He asked where I was staying, which bar I liked in the village, what time I planned to ski tomorrow. I gave vague answers and said my friends had an itinerary. He nodded like he'd heard me, then handed me his instructor card with a first name and a number scribbled on it. "Text me if you want a private lesson," he said. "I can show you the real mountain." That phrase landed weirdly, because it implied there was a part of the resort that didn't belong to the public, a part only he could grant access to. I didn't text him. I went back to my friends and tried to let the day reset my brain. That night we did dinner in the village, loud and normal, the kind of normal you cling to. When we got back to the hotel, around 1030, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You're improving fast. Don't waste it." No name, no greeting, just the sentence. I deleted it. 5 minutes later, another meet at Chair 6 at 815. "I'll get you on the good lines before the crowd." I stared at the screen until my eyes felt hot. I hadn't told him which chair my friends and I liked, and I hadn't given him my number. The most obvious explanation was that he'd pulled it from my registration somehow, but instructors don't have access to that, not for a random group lesson. I told myself it might be someone else, a prank, and went to sleep with my phone face down. Around 1:08 a.m., I woke up to a soft sound outside my door. Not a knock, but the faint click-click of a key card being tried. The latch didn't open because I had the deadbolt engaged, but the handle moved slightly like someone was testing it. I held my breath. Then I heard a low voice, very close to the door, speaking, as if it expected me to answer, "I know you're in there." It was calm, almost affectionate. "You always lock it." Good. My skin went cold. I didn't move until footsteps drifted away down the hall, unhurried. The next morning I tried to put it behind me by going straight to the mountain, with my friends sticking to crowds and sunlight. At 8:22 I was in the lift line when someone slid in beside me, like we'd made a plan. Cal. Same uniform, same goggles, same relaxed posture. He didn't ask if I got his messages. He just said, "You're late," like I owed him something. I told him I hadn't booked anything. He tilted his head and smiled beneath the buff covering his mouth. "You didn't need to," he said. "I'll take care of it." He reached toward the lift gate, and the attendant waved us through, without looking closely like the uniform did all the talking. On the chair, Carl started giving pointers again, but his tone was different, less professional, more proprietary. He talked about how people come to resorts, thinking they're safe because there are rules, but the mountain only respects competence. He asked if I was always this cautious in life, or just on snow. I didn't answer. I watched the tree line in the towers, and waited to unload. At the top, he didn't head toward the main runs where instructors usually stay. He skated to the side, where a rope marked a narrow access lane with a sign that read, "Authorized personnel only." He lifted the rope with his pole and looked back at me. "This will help you," he said. "Trust me." My friends were already dropping into a groomer, calling my name. I told Cal no, that I was staying with my group. The smile disappeared. "They'll slow you down," he said, and the sentence felt less like advice and more like a command. I stepped backward and said clearly that I wasn't going. For a second he just stared at me through mirrored lenses, and I couldn't see his eyes, which made the stare feel endless. Then his voice softened again, almost gentle. "Okay," he said. "Next time." He skated away, and for the rest of the morning I caught glimpses of an instructor jacket at the edge of runs, near the trees, never close enough to be sure, always positioned where he could watch. At lunch, my phone buzzed again, a photo. It was taken from behind me in the lift line, showing my helmet and my jacket, and Cal's sleeve at the edge of frame. The caption read, "You look better when you stop pretending you're not scared." I took the message to ski school administration immediately, hands shaking with anger. The supervisor listened and asked for the instructor's full name. I said Cal, maybe Calvin. I described his face as best I could, his height, his voice. The supervisor pulled up a roster on a computer and frowned. No Cal, scheduled in group lessons. No Cal matching my description. I insisted he wore their uniform. The supervisor said uniforms are kept in a locked equipment room and issued per employee, and then he said something that made my stomach drop. Last week, a set of instructor jacket and helmet had gone missing from the locker area. They thought it was a theft for a prank or a cheap resale. The supervisor asked whether Cal had a name tag. I realized he didn't. Instructors always have visible IDs. I hadn't noticed because I'd been busy trusting the shape of authority instead of verifying it. Ski Patrol got involved. They asked me to point out the guy if I saw him again. They offered to escort me for the rest of the day. The mountain suddenly felt like a place, with predators wearing bright approved colors. I tried to stay calm, tried to keep skiing in open areas, tried to pretend I wasn't scanning every lift line and every run boundary. Around 3:10, my friend Jenna went to the restroom, and I waited outside the lodge, skis in hand, watching crowds. An instructor jacket moved through the plaza. Cal. No goggles now, just sunglasses, like he didn't care about being recognized anymore. He stopped 3 feet from me and spoke as if we were continuing a private conversation. You made it complicated, he said. I told him Patrol was looking for him. He chuckled, softly. They don't look where I look, he replied, and stepped closer so I could smell cold air and that faint machine grease scent I'd started associating with keys and maintenance corridors. You're leaving tomorrow, right? He added. I hadn't told him our checkout day. I said nothing. He nodded as if my silence answered. Don't worry, he said. You'll remember me every time you put your boots on. Then he walked away into the crowd, and the crowd swallowed him like it was designed to. That evening, Patrol reviewed cameras with me. They found the moment in the lift line where the photo had been taken, but the camera angle cut off faces. They tracked the instructor jacket through the plaza until it disappeared into a staff-only corridor near the rental shop. The door to that corridor required an employee badge. Someone had let him in, or he had a way in. I went back to my room and pushed a chair under the handle like I was back in college, then sat on the bed with my skis leaning against the wall because I didn't want anything out of my sight. At uns prezece patru zeci și șase. I heard a soft tap on my window. Not the balcony glass this time, but the smaller side window near the desk that overlooked the service road. I didn't move. The tap came again, slower, more deliberate. When I finally forced myself to look, there was nothing outside but falling snow and the orange glow of a single floodlight. Then my phone buzzed with one last message I told you. The real mountain. The next morning, Ski Patrol walked me to my car, and I left early without skiing because I understood something I didn't want to understand. The most dangerous part of a resort isn't the steep terrain, it's how easily someone can borrow legitimacy and use it to get close enough to choose you. Hot tubs at ski resorts are marketed like therapy. Steam under stars, sore muscles, laughter, the promise that the mountain's danger ends when you step off the snow. The truth is, a hot tub is the most vulnerable place you can put your body, because you're half naked, half relaxed, and surrounded by fog that turns every person into a silhouette until they're close enough to touch you. This happened the same weekend as the instructor incident, which is why I didn't want to go at all, but my friends insisted we needed something normal, something that would reset the vibe. The resort had an outdoor hot tub area behind the lodge, a fenced patio with 2 tubs, a couple of heat lamps, and a view of the slope lights cutting pale lines across the trees. We went around 9:20 late enough that most families were gone, and the crowd was mostly adults with drinks in plastic cups. I picked the tub closer to the building because it felt less exposed. The water was too hot at first, then perfect, and for a few minutes I let my shoulders drop and pretended the world wasn't a checklist of exits. Steam rose in soft waves, and snow fell through the light, like ash. My friends talked about runs and dinner plans, and I tried to match their energy. Then I noticed the camera. It was mounted above the patio door, a small black dome with a blinking LED. It should have made me feel safer. Instead, it made me wonder who watched the footage, and how long it took someone to learn our habits. Around 9:47, the patio door opened and a man walked in alone. He wore a dark parka and carried no towel. That stood out, because everyone comes with a towel. He didn't go to the tubs immediately. He stood near the lockers by the wall, and looked around with slow, deliberate movements, like he was checking where people were positioned. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look lost. He looked like he was arriving for a purpose. My body tensed, without permission. I told myself it was paranoia. He moved to the far tub, the one more exposed to the slope view, and sat on the edge, without taking his parka off. Just sat there with his hood up, hands resting on his knees, watching the steam as if it contained information. A couple left the far tub laughing, and the man didn't move into it. He waited. Then the patio door opened again, and two teens came out, glanced at him, and turned around immediately, deciding the indoor pool was a better idea. The man watched them go. The patio was emptier now, and the silence under the steam started to feel heavy. At 9:53, the camera above the door blinked and went dark. The LED stopped. I stared at it, thinking maybe it cycled or recorded differently at night. Then the heat lamp nearest the fence flickered once and died, plunging the corner of the patio into shadow. Nobody else seemed to notice because the tubs were bright and the steam softened everything, but I noticed because patterns are how you survive. My friend Jenna asked if I was okay. I forced a smile and said I was just tired. The man in the parka stood up. He walked toward our tub. The steam made him appear and disappear in pieces, dark sleeve, shoulder, hood, then the outline of his face under the hood, still too shadowed to read. He didn't speak. He stopped at the edge of our tub and looked down at us like we were objects in water. "Pool closes at 10, Jenna said, politely trying to be helpful. The man nodded, once not at her, but at me, as if he'd heard her, and dismissed the relevant. Then he stepped into the tub without taking his parka off. Water surged. The parka ballooned, and then clung. He lowered himself into the water across from me, close enough that I could see droplets on the fabric. Nobody gets into a hot tub in a parka. It wasn't about warmth. It was about hiding. My throat tightened. My friend Nate joked nervously, "Man, you okay?" The man's head turned slowly toward Nate, then back to me. He smiled, and the smile looked practiced like the instructors had, like maintenance, had the kind of smile that says you're supposed to accept what I'm doing. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was calm, almost intimate, as if we were already in conversation. "You're the one who looks cold." The water was hot enough to sting, but my skin prickled anyway. I decided to leave. I shifted toward the steps. The man's hand moved underwater, subtle, and I felt something brush my calf. Not a bump from turbulence. A touch. Fingers. Deliberate. I jerked my leg away, heart slamming. I stood up too fast, water streaming down my arms, and the night air hit me like a slap. Jenna stood too confused, asking what was wrong. I didn't answer. I grabbed my towel and wrapped it around myself with shaking hands. As I stepped out, the man leaned back, letting the water cover him to the chin parka, floating around his shoulders like a dark skin. "Don't leave," he said, softly. "It's safer in here." The sentence made my stomach turn, because it was exactly backwards. I told my friends we were done now, and started walking toward the patio door. The man didn't stand. He didn't chase. He just watched calm, as if he knew he had time. Halfway to the door, I glanced back and saw he was holding something above the water, to my towel clip, the small metal clasp I'd had on my towel. I hadn't felt it taken. He let it hang from 2 fingers, like a proof of access. "You drop things," he said, and the amusement in his voice felt like a threat. We went inside, to the lobby, wet footprints trailing behind us. I told the front desk the camera outside had gone dark, and there was a man behaving strangely in the hot tub area. The clerk did the polite face until I mentioned the camera. Then she looked up, frowning, and called security. A guard showed up, annoyed, and walked us back out. The patio door opened onto steam and shadow. The heat lamp in the corner was still off. The camera LED was still dark. The far tub was empty. Our tub was empty too, except for ripples that looked too fresh to be from a heater cycle. The guard shone his flashlight around and said maybe the man left when we did. I asked him to check the camera system. He muttered and walked inside. 5 minutes later he returned, less annoyed and more tense. He said the camera feed had been unplugged from the control box, not malfunctioned. I asked who had access to the control box. He said maintenance and security. I asked about the heat lamp. He said it was on the same circuit as the camera power supply in that corner, which meant someone didn't just spook us, they managed the environment. My friends started talking over each other, trying to make sense of it. I stayed quiet, because a colder realization settled in. The man hadn't needed to grab me or escalate. He'd demonstrated control. He'd shown he could turn off surveillance, kill light, get close touch, and then disappear without leaving a scene. The next day, the resort emailed an apology about a temporary camera outage due to weather and offered a voucher for a free drink. Weather doesn't unplug control boxes. That night back in my hotel room, I found a damp Parker-shaped patch on the patio chair outside our tub when I walked past the area in daylight, like someone had laid a wet jacket there recently. Next to it, tucked under the chair leg so it wouldn't blow away, was my towel clip, dry now, as if it had been placed carefully. Under the clip was a folded napkin from the lodge bar, with a single sentence written in pen: "Steam makes everyone look the same." I didn't use the hot tub again. I also stopped believing that crowds automatically equal safety, because the most unsettling thing about that night wasn't the touch. It was the way he moved through a public place, like it was private, like the resort's comfort features. Steam, warmth, dim light were just tools. He could adjust until your instincts stopped trusting your eyes. The thing about ski resorts is that everybody's gear looks the same from 10 feet away, and that's exactly why it's so easy to steal a piece of you without anyone noticing. It happened on a Saturday, when the base village was packed. The kind of day where the ski racks look like a forest of identical skis, and the lodge floor is a river of wet boots. My friends and I had planned dinner off mountain, so I used the resort's ski check to stash my gear bag and boots while we changed and grabbed a quick drink. The attendant was friendly, mid-20s, wearing a beanie and a name tag that kept flipping inward. He took my bag, clipped a numbered tag to it, and handed me the matching stub like it was a guarantee. I remember the number because I repeated it in my head the way you repeat a hotel room number so you don't forget 214. We left for less than an hour. When I came back, the ski check area had thinned out, the music in the lodge had shifted to something slower, and the attendant was gone, replaced by a different guy who looked bored and slightly annoyed to be working. I gave him my stub. He barely glanced at it, reached behind the counter, and slid my bag across like he'd done it 1,000 times. My tag was still on the handle. The number matched. That should have been the end. But the second my hand wrapped the strap, I felt it something subtle, but wrong. The bag was lighter, by just enough that my brain flagged it, before my logic caught up. I stepped aside, unzipped it, and stared. My boots were there, but they were not my boots. Same brand, same general color, same size. Sticker on the heel, but the scuffs were different. The laces were tied in a knot I never use. My boot heater cable, which I always loop around the buckle, was missing. My gloves were there, but the inner lining felt damp, like they'd been worn recently. My goggles case was there, but the zipper pull was broken. I told myself it was a mix-up, a stupid mix-up, until I found the one item that killed that explanation. My season pass, which I keep in a small inner pocket, was gone. In its place was a different pass, in a clear sleeve, same resort logo, same style, but a different name printed on it. The name wasn't mine. It was Even K. Under the name was a photo that looked like it had been taken in a hurry, face slightly blurred, eyes half squinted against sun. The photo didn't match anyone I recognized, but the hairline and jaw shape were uncomfortably similar to mine, like someone had chosen a replacement that could pass if a lifty didn't look too hard. I felt my mouth go dry. I zipped the bag and walked back to the counter, trying to keep my voice steady, as I told the board attendant that my gear had been swapped and my pass was missing. He gave me the look employees give when they assume the customer messed up. He asked if I was sure it was my bag. I pointed to the tag 214. He shrugged and said people grab the wrong bags all the time. I asked to speak to a supervisor. He sighed and called someone on a radio, with the kind of tone that says this is going to be a hassle. While we waited, I opened the bag again and checked every pocket like my real stuff might be hiding under the wrong stuff. That's when I found the note. It was folded tight and tucked into the small mesh pocket where I keep hand warmers. Plain white paper, no logo, No handwriting on the outside. Inside, in clean block letters, it said, "Don't worry. You got a fair trade." My stomach twisted. You don't write fair trade unless you're negotiating something. I looked up at the counter and saw for just a second that the board attendant's name tag was turned inward too, like the first guy's had been. The supervisor arrived, a woman in a resort jacket who spoke fast and smiled too much. She listened, apologized, and immediately pivoted to process. Fill out a lost item form, check the claim tickets, review the storage area. She said they'd pull camera footage. I asked to see it. She said only security could. I asked for security. She said security was busy with an incident. The phrase made my skin tighten because it sounded like a script. While she was talking, she kept glancing past me toward the lodge entrance, like she was waiting for something. I tried the most basic test. I described a scratch on my left boot, a long white gouge from catching a rock last season, and asked her to look. She bent-checked the boot in the bag and said, "Yeah, I see it," without actually finding anything. That's when I realized she wasn't verifying. She was calming. She offered me rental boots and a voucher while they investigated. I said I didn't want rentals. I wanted my pass because without it, I couldn't even get through the lift gates the next day. She said they could issue a replacement pass for a fee. A fee, even after I told her it was stolen under their watch. Anger flared through the fear and made my hands shake. I asked who Evan K. was. Her smile flickered. She said she didn't know. Then she said too quickly, probably another guest. I held up the pass sleeve so she could see the photo. Her eyes touched it and then slid away. "We can't discuss other guests," she said, and that answer felt less like policy and more like avoidance. I left the counter with my wrong bag and my wrong pass because they wouldn't let me leave it behind without proof it belonged to me, which was absurd because they'd already decided it didn't. Back in my hotel room, I laid everything out on the bed, like evidence. The wrong boots, the damp gloves, the pass with Evan's name, the note. Then I noticed something else. Inside the goggles case was a tiny plastic disc taped to the fabric the size of a coin with a small blinking light. Not bright, just the faintest pulse. I peeled it off, and my skin went cold. An AirTag or something like it. A tracker. Someone hadn't just swapped my gear. They'd planted a way to find it again. My phone recognized it immediately and showed an alert. Unknown accessory detected near you. The map history indicated it had been traveling with me for hours, meaning it wasn't just in the bag now. It had likely been on my original gear earlier, or it had been close enough to register at multiple points. I called the front desk and asked for security, and I forced myself to use the word tracker because mix-up was no longer in the vocabulary. Security finally arrived, a tall guy with tired eyes, who took the disc in gloved fingers like he didn't want his prints on it. He said they'd log it. He asked if I had any enemies. I laughed once sharp, because enemies implies a story where you did something to deserve this. I told him I'd had weird encounters at resorts before, people in staff, uniforms, keycard attempts, gear, sabotage. His expression didn't change, which was its own kind of answer. He said he'd take the pass and run the name. He left and didn't come back for 40 minutes. When he returned, he didn't meet my eyes. He said the pass number belonged to a guest account that had been inactive. He said the account photo on file didn't match the photo on the pass sleeve. He said the resort system showed the pass had been printed 2 days ago, not months ago, like a normal season pass. "So, it's fake?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "It's not ours." That was a careful way of saying it had been made to look like theirs. I asked about cameras. He said the ski check camera had been down during a power flicker earlier that afternoon. I felt something inside me go cold and flat, because the pattern was too familiar. The cameras are always down at the exact moment you need them. That night, I locked my skis in the room, even the wrong ones, because I didn't want to leave anything in a hallway or storage space. Around 1A. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No greeting, just try them on. They fit better than you think. My throat tightened. I didn't respond. 10 seconds later, another message arrived. Check the left boot. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then I did the thing I didn't want to do. I checked. Inside the left boot, under the insole, was a folded keycard sleeve from my hotel. The exact sleeve design. In the sleeve was a single keycard, unmarked. Not my keycard. I tested it on my door with shaking hands, already knowing I shouldn't. The lock beeped green. The card worked. Someone had a working key to my room and had hidden it in the wrong boot, like a joke that only made sense to the person telling it. I called the front desk again and demanded a full room rekey, not just new guest cards. They said they'd send someone. I didn't let anyone in. I sat against the door until morning, watching my own breath fog in the dark, because the worst part of that night wasn't losing my gear. It was the feeling that someone had replaced it on purpose, like they were swapping identities, like they wanted me to carry another person's name on my pass and another person's key in my boot, just to prove how easily the resort's systems could be edited. The next day, my original gear turned up in the ski check, neatly stacked with a new tag number, as if it had been there all along. My pass was not with it. In its place was the same note again, folded in the same way, with one extra line added beneath the first. Now you know how easy it is to lose yourself here. A sauna is supposed to be the safest kind of discomfort, the controlled kind you choose. Heat, steam, a quiet room where you sweat out a day of cold. But a sauna is also a perfect trap if someone decides to make it one, because the door closes, your phone fogs your skin, is exposed, and every breath feels like it belongs to the space instead of to you. This happened the night after the gear swap, when my friends convinced me to stop spiraling and do something normal in the hotel spa area. The spa was in the basement, a maze of tiled corridors with dim lights and signs reminding guests to wear sandals. There was a small sauna room, cedar walls, 2-tier benches, a glass door with a handle that looked sturdy but probably wasn't. When we arrived around 8:55, the spa was quiet, mostly empty. A couple lounged by the pool. A staff member in a robe was wiping down chairs. My friends got in the hot tub, while I opted for the sauna, because I wanted to be alone for 5 minutes, without seeming rude about it. I stepped into the sauna, sat on the lower bench with a towel under me, and let the heat wrap my shoulders. The air smelled like cedar, and something faintly metallic from the heater rocks. For the first minute it worked. My thoughts slowed. Then the door opened and 3 men walked in together, not in robes like most guests, but in dark, athletic wear, hoodies and track pants, like they'd come down here without checking in. They were mid-20s to early 30s, faces flushed from cold outside rather than heat inside. One of them held a plastic cup with no drink, just a prop in his hand. They didn't nod hello, the way strangers usually do in shared, quiet spaces. They entered, shut the door, and spread out in a way that made my body notice geometry before my mind named it. One sat on the upper bench near the door. Another sat on the lower bench opposite me, close enough that his knee was within a foot of mine. The third didn't sit at first. He stood by the heater, looking at the rocks like he was inspecting them. Then poured a ladle of water, slowly, just enough to make the steam hiss. The sudden humidity grabbed my lungs. The glass door fogged, immediately turning the hallway outside into a blur. The men spoke quietly to each other in short sentences I couldn't fully catch, like they were trying not to be overheard, even though nobody else was in the room. I told myself to leave. My hand even moved toward the door. Then the man on the upper bench near the door said casually, "You can stay," as if he'd sensed the movement without looking. The tone wasn't friendly. It was permissive. My skin prickled. I forced a polite smile that felt fake on my face. "Just cooling down for a minute," I said, and started to stand. The guy closest to me shifted his feet slightly, blocking the clean path to the door without overtly blocking it. It was subtle enough that if someone reviewed footage later, it would look like normal shifting, but subtle doesn't mean harmless. "Long day?" he asked. His voice had that smoothness of someone trying to sound normal. I nodded, once kept my eyes on the door handle. The standing guy by the heater poured more water, a full ladle this time. The steam hit like a slap, thick and immediate, and the room went from warm to oppressive. My throat tightened. Careful, I said, automatically. He smiled, without humor. Heat helps you relax, he replied. The man near the door leaned back and let his arm drape along the bench, a posture that looked lazy but occupied space like he was making sure the door area belonged to him. The closed guy's eyes flicked to my wrist. You got a band, he asked. I didn't understand at first. Then I remembered the hotel. Spa used wristbands for guests, sometimes depending on room package. I wasn't wearing one, because my room key worked for access. I'm staying here, I said. Room key. The close guy nodded slowly, like he was evaluating a claim. Funny, he said. They've been strict lately. The words felt rehearsed. The standing guy by the heater finally sat, but not away from me. He sat on the upper bench, directly above the close guy, creating a stack of bodies that narrowed the room. Then he said my first name. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just dropped it into the heat like it belonged there. Mark, he said, and my stomach went cold under the sweat. I didn't answer. I didn't ask how he knew. I knew how he knew. My pass, my gear, my room. The mountain and the hotel weren't separate. They were one ecosystem. The man near the door chuckled softly. See, he said to the others, he hears us. He leaned forward slightly. You've been busy, he added, talking to security, filing reports, making people look. The close guy shrugged like it was ashamed. We're just trying to keep this simple, he said. The standing now sitting guy reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out something small, then held it between two fingers so I could see it in the fogged light. My towel clip, the same metal clasp that had been taken at the hot tub weeks earlier and returned with a note. My chest tightened. He set it on the bench between us like a calling card. You keep dropping things, he said. The same line, different place, same script. My skin crawled. I stood fully now, committing, and said move. The man near the door didn't move. He smiled and said, no phones in here. And in that moment I realized my phone was outside the sauna in my locker because I'd wanted to relax. I had voluntarily disarmed myself. The close guy leaned forward, elbows on knees, and spoke with that almost helpful tone predators use when they're trying to sound reasonable. We don't want trouble, he said. We just want you to stop making noise. Stop pulling staff into it. Stop acting like the resort owes you answers. I stared at the door handle, then at his hands. His hands were bare. No gloves. But the nails were clean and short, the kind of hands that can do small adjustments quickly. The door guy's hand was also bare, resting near the latch too close to be casual. The heater hissed as water evaporated, and the heat climbed again, forcing sweat into my eyes. My heart started racing in a way that made the room tilt slightly. Open the door, I said, and my voice sounded hoarse. The door guy tilted his head. You're already warm, he said. Sit. The word was a command now. The close guy's knee bumped mine, deliberate. Not a shove, but a reminder of distance. I stepped backward, closer to the heater side, because at least that gave me space to move, even if it was hotter. The standing guy above me shifted, and his shadow fell across my face. You know what happens when people make a scene at resorts, he said. They get labeled. They get ignored. They get blamed for their own bad decisions. The sentence was too accurate, too informed by how resorts protect themselves. My mouth went dry. I looked at the heater rocks, at the ladle, at the metal bucket of water. A small plan formed ugly and simple. I grabbed the ladle and flung water, not at the men but onto the heater, in one fast motion, dumping the entire bucket. The hiss exploded into a roar, and steam surged so violently the room turned into white blindness. The man cursed and shifted instinctively, hands up, eyes squeezed. In that chaos, I moved toward the door. I couldn't see the handle clearly, but I felt it grabbed it and yanked. The door didn't open at first. The latch held for 1 second, and I thought they'd locked it. Then it gave, and cold hallway air punched through. I stumbled out half-blind lungs, burning, and didn't stop until I reached the pool area, where people were sitting, and where sound existed again. I yelled for staff. I didn't care about embarrassment anymore. A spa attendant rushed over. My friends popped out of the hot tub, confused. I pointed back toward the sauna and said 3 men were inside and wouldn't let me leave. The attendant grabbed a radio. Security arrived within minutes, faster than they ever seemed to arrive for cameras or gear, which almost made me angry. They opened the sauna door. The steam poured out, like breath. The room was empty. No men. No towels. No cups. The benches were wet. The heater was still sizzling, and the only thing left behind was my towel clip sitting neatly on the lower bench as if it had always belonged there. Security asked what they looked like. I tried to describe them through the haze of heat and adrenaline. One guard checked cameras in the hallway outside the sauna. He frowned and said the sauna hallway camera had been fogged by humidity and was basically useless for the last 20 minutes. Another guard checked the spa entrance camera. He said he saw 3 figures enter the spa area in dark clothing, but their faces were obscured by hoods, and the angle and then the feed jumped during a brief timecode gap, like the recorder had buffered. The manager on duty offered apologies and vouchers, the same currency of silence. I refused and asked for the police. They asked again if anything was stolen. Nothing was stolen. That almost made it worse, because it meant the point wasn't theft. The point was access. They could enter a locked hotel, spa, choose a room with 1 door, fog the glass, kill my leverage, and then vanish without leaving proof, while making sure I left terrified and breathless so I'd sound dramatic when I told the story. Later that night, back in my room, I found condensation marks on my door peephole, like someone had pressed a warm palm over it and warmed the metal enough to fog. Beneath the peephole, stuck to the wood with a single piece of clear tape, was a small card printed with a simple sentence. Rulers are for people who ask. I checked out at dawn. I didn't ski again. I drove down the mountain with my windows cracked in freezing air, just to keep myself awake, because the sauna taught me a lesson. The slopes never did. The most dangerous thing at a resort isn't falling. It's being calmly herded into a space where your instincts know you're in trouble, but the world outside will later insist nothing happened at all. I didn't know you could feel eyes on you while you sleep, until the night it happened in a hotel hallway that looked exactly like every other hallway. Beige carpet, framed mountain photos, soft lighting designed to feel safe. I'd switched hotels after the sauna incident, choosing one farther from the lift's older, less luxury because I wanted fewer staff-only corridors and fewer people with keys. I told myself simple meant safer. That was my mistake. The room was on the 2nd floor, close to the stairwell, and I did everything right. I deadbolted. I set a chair under the handle. I put a towel along the bottom of the door to block light and sound. I even taped the peephole with a small piece of paper, something I'd learned from travel safety threads, because peepholes work both ways, if someone has the right tool. I fell asleep around 1120, with the TV on low, the kind of background noise people use to convince themselves they're not alone. At some point in the night, I woke up without knowing why, that animal wakefulness, where your body catches a change before your mind names it. The TV was still on, but the sound was muted, as if someone had pressed the button. I hadn't. The room felt colder. Then I heard it, the faintest scrape outside my door like fabric against carpet, and a soft exhale that didn't belong to me. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening. Another scrape. Then the slowest, gentlest sound of something touching my door. Fingertips, maybe moving along the seam where the door met the frame, as if someone was feeling for vibration, for breath, for proof that I was inside. I held my breath. The sound paused, then returned closer to the peephole. I remembered the paper I'd taped over it, and my skin tightened, because I could imagine a face pressed to the other side, annoyed by the obstruction. A second later the paper rustled. Not much, just a tiny movement, like air being pulled through a narrow space. Someone was trying to suction it off. My heart slammed. I kept my body still, because any movement would telegraph life. The paper didn't come off, but the peephole darkened the way it does when something covers it. I knew with sick certainty that an eye was on the other side. Not a glance. A sustained stare. I stayed frozen until my muscles began to cramp. Then a new sound joined it, the faint click of a phone camera, focusing that tiny mechanical adjustment you only notice when everything else is silent. I realized someone was trying to record through the peephole. My anger flared, hot under fear. I slid my hand slowly toward my phone on the nightstand and stopped when the peephole darkened again, as if the person outside sensed movement through the door. I waited. The stare held. Seconds felt like minutes. Then, very softly, a whisper seeped through the door like it was leaking through the wood. "Don't move." The words were barely audible, but they were clear, and they were addressed to me. My throat went dry. I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. I listened for footsteps, for retreat. None. The presence stayed patient and close. Then the whisper came again, almost amused. "I can hear your heart." That sentence broke something in me, because it meant the person wasn't just outside. They were tuned in, attentive, enjoying the control. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, keeping the screen dim. The call connected, and I whispered my location. While I spoke, the hallway went silent, as if whoever was outside had shifted away from the door to avoid being heard on the call. The dispatcher told me to stay quiet, stay inside, and officers were on the way. I stayed on the line. 2 minutes later, my door handle moved once gently. Not a test to open it because the deadbolt was engaged, but a reminder that the person knew exactly where the boundary was. Then the peephole darkened again, and I heard the camera click once more. The dispatcher asked if the person was still there. I said yes. I wanted to say more, but fear had turned my mouth into sand. Finally the sound receded, a slow drag across carpet, then silence. The police arrived 10 minutes later, lights flashing outside the window, boots in the stairwell. They cleared the hallway and found nothing. No suspicious person. No lingering guest. No hoodie in the shadows. They knocked on nearby doors and woke up a couple who looked genuinely confused. One officer asked if I had a door camera or a way to prove someone had been there. I didn't. The hotel's hallway camera, the front desk clerk said, had been temporarily offline since a router update. Of course it was. The officers took my statement anyway, and they checked the peephole. The paper was still taped over it, but it was slightly wrinkled like something had tried to pull it free. The younger officer touched the peephole rim and frowned. "It's warm," he said. "Warm metal in a cold hallway. Someone had pressed against it long enough to heat it." After the officers left, I couldn't sleep. I sat in a chair, facing the door until dawn, watching the handle, listening to every footstep in the hallway and imagining it slowing outside my room. At chasse dois prezeche. As daylight filled the curtains, I finally dared to open the door. On the carpet outside, right against my threshold, there was a single object, a small round suction cup like the ones people use to mount things to glass. Stuck to it was a folded sticky note. I peeled it open with shaking fingers. In the same clean block letters I'd seen before, it read "Better, covering next time." That's when I understood the hallway watcher wasn't random. It was part of the same pattern. Someone who wanted to show me that barriers are negotiable, that privacy is a suggestion, and that even if you do everything right, the story can still be written from the other side of the door. I checked out that morning and drove to a different town. I didn't tell the hotel clerk why. I just handed over the key and left, because arguing with a building about what it allowed felt pointless. The shortcut to the parking lot was one of those resort myths that spreads because people are tired, cold, and eager to believe there's an easier way out. Every mountain has them, a cut-through behind the rental shop, a staircase that skips the long corridor, a back door that saves you 5 minutes. The problem is, shortcuts also create blind zones, places without cameras, without staff, without witnesses. Exactly the kind of places someone can turn a normal night into a private one. This was my final night at that resort, the night I told myself I was done with spas and hot tubs and night skiing and any situation where the mountain could isolate me. My friends had gone ahead to the car to warm it up. I stayed behind because I'd forgotten my gloves in the lodge. The lodge was nearly empty chairs, up on tables, staff wiping down counters, the big fireplace still glowing, but the energy gone. I found my gloves near the bar, grabbed them and headed toward the main exit. A young employee in a fleece jacket caught my eye and said, "Parking." I nodded. He pointed toward a side hallway. and said, "You can take the shortcut. Saves you the long walk around the village." The tone was casual helpful. Under different circumstances, I would have thanked him and followed. But after everything, my brain flagged the offer like a flare. Which way, I asked, forcing myself to sound neutral. He smiled and gestured again. "Through there," he said. "Out the service door. You'll be right by Lot C." I could have ignored him. I should have. Instead, I asked one more question. "Is it open?" He nodded immediately, too quickly. "Yeah, all night," he said, and then he added, "It's quicker." Quicker, quicker, quicker. The word people use to trade safety for speed. I pretended to agree. I walked into the side hallway, but I kept my phone in my hand and my senses sharp. The hallway narrowed lights, dimmer walls lined with maintenance closets and stacked chairs. The carpet changed to industrial rubber. The air smelled like bleach and wet concrete instead of food. Halfway down, I noticed something that tightened my stomach. The security camera above the intersection had a small piece of tape over the lens, just enough to blur the view. It could have been a repair note. It could have been nothing. But my skin didn't believe nothing anymore. I kept walking because turning around in a narrow corridor feels like admitting fear, and fear makes you predictable. At the end of the hallway was a metal door, with a push bar, and a sign that read, "Staff Only." Beneath it, a smaller sign, "Emergency Exit, Alarmed." I stopped. That didn't match shortcut. The employee behind me, because of course he'd followed, said lightly, "Just push it. Alarms disabled after hours." My mouth went dry. That sentence was too informed. He was close enough now that I could smell him cold air deodorant and the faint tang of machine grease. He wore a resort fleece, but there was no name tag. The fleece looked clean, too clean for someone who'd been working a shift. I turned slightly so I wasn't fully facing the door, and I asked, "What's your name?" He smiled, and the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Does it matter?" he asked. Then he took a step closer and lowered his voice. "Your car's not far. Don't make it hard." The words landed like a hand on my chest. My fingers tightened around my phone. I clicked the screen to dial 911, but there was no service in the corridor. Thick walls, basement-level dead zone. I tried anyway, watched it fail. The employee glanced at my phone and shrugged as if he'd expected that. "Cameras don't work here either," he said softly. And that sentence confirmed everything. This wasn't a helpful shortcut. It was a chosen location. My heart hammered. "Move," I said, and stepped sideways to create space. He didn't move. Behind him the hallway was empty, but the emptiness felt staged. The lodge staff sounds were distant now, muffled by walls. I could scream, but sound doesn't travel the way you want in service corridors. The employee nodded toward the door again. "Just go," he said. "Then you're done." That line could have meant done with the corridor, done with the resort, done with everything. My throat tightened. I looked at the emergency exit door and understood the trap. If I pushed it, I'd step outside into darkness, behind the building, where the parking lot might be visible, or might not be. If I didn't push it, I stayed in a corridor with a man who had positioned himself between me and the lodge. Either way, he controlled the choice. So I did the only thing I could do. I made a scene inside the building instead of outside. I lifted my phone and hit the emergency alarm button on the wall next to the door. One of those red boxes designed for fire alarms. The moment my thumb smashed it, a siren exploded into life, sharp and relentless, and a strobe light above the door began flashing. The noise was immediate and public, the kind of noise buildings can't ignore. The employee flinched, hard eyes narrowing, and for the first time his calm cracked. "What the hell?" he hissed. I used that crack. I shoved past him, shoulder-checking him into the wall, and sprinted back down the corridor toward the lodge, the alarm screaming behind me like a guardian I'd finally activated. I burst into the main hall where two real employees looked up, startled, and I shouted that someone was in the service corridor. Security arrived fast, too fast, like they'd been nearby already. They ran down the hallway with flashlights and radios. I stood shaking near the fireplace, surrounded by normal people in uniforms trying not to collapse. 5 minutes later, the security supervisor returned and said they found no one. The corridor was empty. The emergency exit door was still closed. The camera at the intersection was still taped, I demanded to know who the employee was. The supervisor asked me to describe him. I did. The supervisor frowned and said no one on shift wore that fleece color tonight. He checked staff rosters. Nobody matched. Then he did something that made my stomach turn. He gently suggested I might have mistaken a guest for an employee because people buy merch. That was true, and that's exactly why it was such a perfect costume. I insisted someone had followed me. The supervisor nodded, sympathetic, and said they'd review footage. The footage, of course, was blurred where the tape was. The only clear frames showed me walking into the corridor alone, then sprinting out alone as the alarm flashed. In the video, there was no second person behind me. No follower. No fleece jacket. Nothing. The supervisor's face held that polite doubt people use when they want you to stop talking. I left the lodge with security, escorting me the long way around through well-lit paths and open areas. The parking lot was cold and quiet. My friends were waiting in the car, confused and irritated until they saw my face. On the drive out, I kept checking the rearview mirror. At a stop sign near the resort exit, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. One sentence. Smart. You chose the loud door. There was no way the message could have been sent if nobody had been there. Unless the sender wasn't a person you could catch on camera in the first place. Or unless the sender had been watching from somewhere the camera didn't cover, enjoying the fact that even when I did the right thing, it still felt like playing a game on someone else's board. I didn't go back to that resort. I don't take shortcuts anymore. I'd rather walk 10 extra minutes in the open than save 2 minutes in a corridor designed to keep the world from seeing what happens inside it. Avalanches are supposed to be a mountain problem, not a resort problem. Resorts have patrol bombs, fences, protocols, and bright, closed signs that make guests feel like the danger has been negotiated on their behalf. That illusion almost got people killed the morning the slide came down on an open run inbounds, while families were still laughing on the chairlift overhead. It was a high-pressure bluebird day, after 2 nights of heavy snowfall and wind, the kind of day everyone calls epic, while patrol quietly posts the warning level and asks you to stay on marked trails. The backside balls were roped off the big terrain under the ridgeline stamped with closed placards, and those red Avalanche hazard triangles that are supposed to end arguments. My friends and I stayed conservative. We skid groomers. We kept to crowds. We told ourselves we were done tempting the mountain. Around 1040 we took a long run that cut under a steep face on the side of the resort boundary. A face that was still closed and fenced because it loaded hard in wind. You could see the crown line potential from below, even if you weren't an expert. The way the snow looked pillowy and tense near the ridge, like a blanket pulled too tight. As we traversed the cat track at the top of the run, I noticed something that shouldn't have been there. A gap in the fence line. A clean opening like the rope had been unhooked and rehooked, not broken by weather. 2 sets of fresh ski tracks crossed through the gap and disappeared into the closed bowl. They were sharp, deep, and recent, like the skiers had gone in minutes ago. A patroller was stationed farther down talking to a guest, and I almost waved him over, almost pointed, but the line was moving and my friends were already dropping. I told myself patrol probably knew that maybe it had just opened and I'd missed the announcement, because admitting the alternative that someone had intentionally entered closed avalanche terrain made my throat tighten. We dropped into the run below wide and funneled firm corduroy with soft pockets on the sides. Halfway down near a stand of trees, the sound changed. The mountain made a low, distant thump, like a door slamming somewhere far away. Then, another closer. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't a groomer. It was the deep, blunt percussion of snow settling in bulk. My friend Jenna stopped and looked uphill. "Did you hear that?" she asked. And the way her voice flattened told me her instincts were doing math her brain didn't want to do. I stopped, too. Above us, high on the closed face, a line appeared near the ridgeline. A thin fracture that grew fast, snapping sideways like a zipper. For a split second, the snowpack held in place, and then the entire slab let go at once. A white wall, detaching, and sliding with a sound like tearing fabric amplified through a canyon. The slide accelerated, immediately pouring down the face in a thick, rolling mass that swallowed trees and threw up a powder cloud that looked like smoke. People on the chairlift above started yelling, their voices thin and useless in the open air. Patrol sirens weren't even on yet. My legs locked. For 1 6-second brain trying to process scale, then survival took over. Move. Someone screamed. Maybe me, maybe Jenna, and we pushed, skating hard toward the side of the run, where the trees were denser and the slope angled slightly away. The avalanche hit the run like a freight train of snow, not the full depth of the face, but enough to create a surging tongue that spilled over the berm and rushed across the groomed surface. The leading edge was heavy churning, and it moved faster than you think snow can move. It grabbed the tail end of our run, ate the center line, and shoved a wave of debris downhill with a hiss and grind that sounded like 1,000 broken branches. I threw myself toward the uphill tree line and hooked an arm around a trunk, pressing my body into the bark as cold air and snow blasted past. The force tugged at my skis, tried to yank my legs out into the flow. My bindings held barely, and I felt the bruise of my own grip in my forearm as I clung. The world turned white and loud, and then abruptly quiet, like someone hit mute after the worst second of your life. When the powder cloud settled, the run below us was unrecognizable. The groomed trail was buried under chunks of slab and broken snow, uneven mounds like a frozen ocean. Someone farther down was screaming a name. A kid was crying. A skier's pole stuck out of debris at an angle that made my stomach flip. Patrol arrived on sleds and skis, radios crackling, voices clipped and urgent. They started beacon checks, probing, shoveling, forming a line. My friends and I stood stunned at the edge, shaking faces burning with adrenaline. A patroller yelled for everyone to move to the side and stay put, then asked if anyone saw people on the face before it went. I told him about the tracks through the fence gap, about the opening that looked unhooked. The patroller's expression tightened in a way that wasn't surprise so much as confirmation. He didn't say, "You must be mistaken," he said flatly. That area was bombed at dawn. Bombed means controlled. Bombed means they already tried to release whatever would release. It shouldn't have gone, he added under his breath, like he was talking to himself more than to me. Rescue work continued. They pulled one person out, shaken but breathing, buried up to the chest in soft debris near the margin. They pulled another out, with a broken leg. Miraculously, nobody died, but the margin between injured and gone felt razor thin. While patrol worked, I kept staring at the ridge, waiting to see a silhouette, a bright jacket, anyone. Instead, near the fence gap, I saw a dark figure moving laterally along the ridgeline, not skiing down, not panicking, just traversing in a steady line away from the slide path. No patrol jacket, no radio, no urgency. The figure paused once and looked down toward the debris field, then continued calm, as if the chaos below was expected. I told the nearest patroller what I saw. He glanced up, squinted, then keyed, his radio voice sharper now. "Possible visual on ridge," he said, and his partner started up on skins without hesitation. Later in the base lodge, management called it an unexpected release and thanked patrol for their rapid response. They put up additional signs. They handed out hot chocolate, like warmth could cover the tremor in people's hands. I tried to report the fence gap to guest services and got redirected twice, until I ended up in a small office with a security supervisor who asked me to repeat everything slowly. When I described the rope opening that looked deliberate, he stopped taking notes for a second and looked at me like he was deciding how much truth to allow into the room. Then he said carefully, "We've had interference with closures." Interference. Like it was a signal problem, not a person. He asked if I had photos. I didn't. He said they'd check cameras. I asked about the ridge figure. He said that area had no camera coverage because it was outside guest zones. I asked about the tracks through the fence. He said, "Wind can create misleading marks." I almost accepted the gaslight, because it would have been easier, but then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One sentence. "You grabbed the tree. Good instinct." My throat went tight. I hadn't told anyone in the lodge that detail. I didn't even tell my friends because I didn't want to admit how close I'd been. I showed the security supervisor the message. His face went still. He asked for my phone, then thought better of it, and asked me to forward it to an email address he wrote on a sticky note. The sticky note had no resort letterhead. "For the file," he said, voice flat. That night when I tried to sleep, I kept seeing the crown line tearing open like a zipper, kept hearing the thump of the slab letting go. The avalanche itself was terrifying, but the part that haunted me wasn't the mountain's power. It was the possibility that someone had opened that fence on purpose, let people into close terrain, and triggered a release. At the exact moment, the run below would be full of witnesses, like they wanted spectacle. The next morning, the resort posted a statement about guest responsibility, and reminded everyone that closures exist for safety. Responsibility is a convenient word when the alternative is admitting somebody used the mountain like a weapon. The night I got left behind on the mountain, the cold wasn't the first thing I noticed. The first thing I noticed was the absence of sound. The way a resort goes from busy to hollow, the second the last chair stops turning. During the day, even the wind feels buffered by people. Music drifting from the base lifts, humming voices bouncing off lodge walls. After hours, the mountain becomes what it always was before the resort was built. A dark, indifferent slope full of trees that do not care if you have a room key or friends or a plan. It happened on our final evening after the avalanche day had rattled everyone's nerves into that forced laughter people use when they want to pretend they're okay. We did an early dinner. We packed the car. We told ourselves we'd do one last easy run at dusk and then call it. My friends wanted closure, something normal to finish on. I wanted out. I agreed anyway because saying no felt like admitting I was scared of a place designed to sell comfort. We took the lift up around 4:55, the sky already bruising purple, the wind sharpening. At the top, the lift he called Last Ride, and the chairs behind us were mostly empty. We skied a wide intermediate trail back toward the base, laughing too loud, making jokes about hot chocolate and long drives. Near the bottom, my friend Nate stopped and said he needed the restroom before we hit the road. Jenna said she forgot her water bottle at the lodge. The group split, the way groups split, when they assume the world is still staffed. "Meet at the car," Nate said. 5 minutes. I skied to the lodge, set my skis on the rack, and went inside. The lobby looked like a place closing its eyes. Chairs flipped lights, dimmer, a single employee stacking cups. I used the restroom, washed my hands, and when I came out I saw my phone had 1% battery. 1% after a full day. I'd been filming little clips, checking maps, reading messages I shouldn't have. I plugged it into a wall outlet near the vending machines and watched it blink. The screen lit just long enough to show one new text from an unknown number. The kind of message that makes your stomach drop before you even read it. "Don't rush," it said. "The mountain likes it when you're last." My fingers went numb. I yanked the phone off the charger and shoved it in my pocket, pretending I hadn't read it. Then the lodge lights flickered once like the building sighed, and the front doors locked with an audible click. Not slamming shut, just clicking into night mode. I walked to the doors anyway and pushed. They didn't open. I stared at the exit sign, like it had betrayed me. An employee behind the counter glanced up and said casually, "We're closed." I said my friends were outside, and my car was in the lot. He shrugged. "Side door," he said, pointing down a hallway. I hesitated because side doors are how stories start. But the main doors were locked, and the employee was already looking away. I followed the hallway, past a dark rental shop, past a staff-only door with a keypad, and reached a metal exit that led to a service walkway behind the lodge. I pushed it open and stepped into cold that felt like a physical force. The wind was stronger back here, channeling between buildings, carrying the smell of snow and diesel. The base area was mostly dark, only a few lamps on the village lights dimmed. I expected to see my friends by the car, maybe waving, maybe impatient. Instead, I saw empty lots, rows of vehicles, and no moving people. I jogged toward where we'd parked, and realized with a slow horror that the car wasn't there. The exact spot was empty. Tire tracks were already softening under new snow. My first thought was a mistake. Wrong lot. Wrong row. I ran 2 aisles, scanning license plates, heart climbing. Nothing. The shuttle buses were gone. The resort road beyond the lot looked empty, dark, and slick. I checked my pockets for my phone, and felt the dead weight of 1% again. I hit the power button. The screen flashed, then died. No call. No light. Nothing. I stood in the cold with my breath fogging and felt the mountain shift into its real mode. Not entertainment, not a managed space, but a system that removes options when you're not paying attention. I ran back toward the lodge side door. It was locked now. I banged, once, then again harder. No one answered. The wind ate the sound. A single overhead lamp flickered, as if the resort itself was getting tired of pretending. I tried the handle again until my fingers hurt. Nothing. For the first time I understood the phrase, left behind, in a physical way. It wasn't just loneliness. It was infrastructure shutting down around you, taking away the easy exits you assumed were permanent. I turned and looked uphill. The runs above were dark, except for a few faint lights, near lift towers, and the tree line was a solid wall. Ski patrol would be off the hill soon, if they weren't already. I knew the rules: don't ski after hours. Don't hike into closed terrain. Don't try to cut through woods. Rules are easy when you're warm. In that moment, the only rule that mattered was finding a place that wasn't a parking lot in open wind. I spotted a maintenance road that ran behind the base buildings. A packed strip of snow with tire tracks leading toward a cluster of snow-making sheds. I followed it, moving fast to stay warm, scanning for any sign of people. My boots crunched on hardpack. My breath sounded too loud. The sheds came into view, low structures, metal doors, warning signs, padlock. One door had a small overhang and a windbreak from stacked pallets. I ducked under it and tried to calm my breathing. In the partial shelter, I heard something that made my blood cool: footsteps. Not mine. Slow crunching on the road behind me, approaching at an unhurried pace. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped. Then, from the dark, a voice called softly, almost conversational, like someone talking across a room. "You're always the last one." I didn't answer. I stepped closer to the shed door and tested the handle. Locked. Of course it was. The footsteps resumed closer now, and I realized the sound wasn't coming from the road anymore. It was coming from the snow to my left, in the open lot where no packed path existed. Whoever was walking wasn't following tire tracks. They were cutting through powder without hesitation. I backed away from the shed and moved toward a line of trees at the edge of the lot, thinking, if I could get into the village lights, I could find staff, a phone, a warm place. The crunching adjusted with me. Always. Matching. Not chasing. Matching. That controlled pacing did something to my brain. It told me this wasn't a lost employee. This was someone who'd been waiting for exactly this version of me, alone, cold, with a dead phone after hours, in a place where cameras and witnesses sleep. I broke into a run, feet slipping. The crunching didn't speed up, which was worse, because it meant it didn't need to. As I ran, I saw a familiar shape ahead, through the dim light, a rope line, and a narrow service gate that led toward the lower lift maze. The gate was open just enough to pass. Not broken. Opened. I didn't stop to question it. I slipped through and followed the lift maze path uphill, hoping to reach the main plaza where someone might still be around. The chairs above creaked in wind, empty and still. That sound, the gentle metallic sway, felt like the resort's skeleton moving. Halfway up, I heard the crunching again. Now behind the gate I'd just passed through, and I realized the gate hadn't slowed the follower at all. It was just another choice. The mountain had presented another funnel. The path narrowed along a tree line, and beyond the trees I saw darkness that could swallow a person without effort. That's when I saw the cabin. The same cabin from the trees, or one like it, sitting just beyond the boundary of light. Roof sagging, windows black. It shouldn't have been visible from here, and yet there it was, like the mountain was recycling a set piece for the final act. The sight hit me with a sick recognition. This place wasn't new. It was connected. The crunching behind me stopped. I turned, and at the edge of the lift light a figure stood in a dark jacket, hood up, face hidden. No skis. No polis. The figure raised a hand and pointed toward the cabin, slow and confident, the same gesture as before, the same invitation disguised as instruction. My throat tightened. I backed away, and the figure didn't advance. It didn't need to. The lift towers above groaned. The wind rose louder, now howling through metal and cable. In that sound I heard a whisper layered beneath it, so close it felt like it was inside my own ear. Forgotten up here. I ran the other direction, away from the cabin, down a service track that curled toward a lower access road. My lungs burned. My hands went numb. The dark swallowed edges, and the only guidance was the faint orange glow of a distant lamp. Behind me, the crunching resumed always at the same distance, like a leash I couldn't see. The path dipped into a low area where snow was deeper, and my boots sank. I stumbled, caught myself, stumbled again. That's when I saw the prints in the snow ahead, crossing the path at a diagonal, long, narrow impressions, with separated toe points, the same unnatural pattern from the Off-Piste story, crisp and aligned like a warning line drawn across my store. Escape. My stomach flipped. I stopped, despite myself. The crunching behind me stopped too, and in the silence I heard another sound closer to the trees, a soft laugh, breathy, amused. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the sound of a person enjoying a plan working. I turned toward the trees and saw nothing, but I felt eyes, felt attention like pressure. I forced myself to move again, stepping over the prints as if they were just snow, as if acknowledging them gave them power. The service track led to a lift tower platform with a small maintenance enclosure beneath it, a boxy metal space with a narrow gap behind stacked materials. I crawled into the gap, pressing myself into cold metal and frozen snow, trying to make myself smaller than the world. The wind hammered the tower above, making the cables sing. Somewhere nearby, the crunching slowed and stopped. Then footsteps circled close, not rushing the pace of someone who knows time is on their side. A shadow moved across the snow in front of the gap, blocking what little light existed. A voice spoke low and calm, as if talking to a child, hiding in a game. You did all the right things, it said. You locked doors. You told security. You made noise. But you still ended up here. I clamped my mouth shut to keep my teeth from chattering loud enough to give me away. The voice waited patient. Then it added softer. Because the mountain decides. I stayed still until my muscles trembled from cold and fear. At some point the footsteps retreated. I didn't know if it left, or if it simply moved to a place where it could watch without being heard. Hours passed in fragments. The cold crawled into my bones. The wind never stopped howling. I began to hallucinate. Small sounds, keycard beeps, taps on glass, the hiss of steam. I thought about my friends, about them driving down the mountain, laughing at how quickly they'd get home. I wondered if they'd noticed I was missing. Then I remembered the texts, the messages that could be sent in my name, and a darker possibility formed. At dawn, when grey light finally softened the sky, I heard snowmobiles in the distance, and a radio voice cutting through wind. Real voices. Patrol voices. I crawled out of the gap and stumbled toward the sound, waving both arms like a lunatic. 2 patrollers found me near the tower, eyes wide when they realized I was a guest, not staff. They wrapped me in a blanket, asked where I'd been, asked why I hadn't called. I told them my phone died. They asked why my friends left. I said I didn't know. At the patrol shack, they called my friends. Nate answered immediately, voice shaking, insisting they thought I'd left hours ago because they'd received a text from my number at 512 that said, "I'm heading down early, don't wait." I stared at him through the speakerphone, unable to speak because I never sent that text. My phone was dead in my pocket by 512. Jenna started crying and apologizing, saying they searched the lot, asked the lodge, and were told the building was closed. Patrol asked why they didn't report a missing person immediately. Nate said they believed the text, believed I was safe, believed the system. After the call, a patroller handed my phone back after charging it briefly. It powered on with 6% battery. One new message sat at the top, time-stamped 511. Unknown number. One sentence. Thank you for letting them leave. I showed it to the patroller. His face tightened, and he took my phone, walked to an office, and returned later, with his expression set into something flat and controlled. "You're done skiing here," he said, not unkindly, "and you're not walking to your car alone." They escorted me to the parking lot. My friend's car was back in the exact spot it had been, as if it had never left. Frost covered the windshield evenly, like it hadn't been driven at all. The keys were in the cup holder where Nate swore he left them, and yet Nate's story was that they'd driven down the mountain and called me from the road. His call history showed the call. His phone had location pings down in town. None of it fit. As I loaded my gear, I looked up once at the mountain. The lift chairs swayed gently in the morning, wind empty and innocent like they'd never watched anything. Then high on the ridge near the closed bowl, I saw a dark silhouette standing still, just a notch of shadow against snow, head angled downward as if watching me leave. The figure didn't wave. It didn't need to. My phone buzzed one last time as we drove out signal returning in town. A final message appeared. No sender, no number displayed, just text. Off the map doesn't mean alone. I never went back to that resort. I also stopped telling myself the scariest stories are the ones where a monster jumps out. The scariest stories are the ones where the world looks normal. Your friends swear they did everything right and you still end up forgotten in the dark because someone knew exactly which small switch to flip to make you disappear for a night.